Welcome back to Harry's Cosmos, where every story is a new adventure. Today we're exploring, what if Harry and Hermione discovered they were soulmates bound by ancient magic? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a tale. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The thread between the last morning of summer arrived at the burrow with the smell of frying bread and the sound of a gnome swearing somewhere out past the runner beans. Harry woke before the light had properly settled, in the narrow attic room under Ron's snoring, and lay very still, holding on to the shape of a dream that was already thinning at the edges. There had been a shore, not the gray pebbled coast he half remembered from a childhood outing the Dursleys had never meant him to enjoy, but a long pale strand under a sky the color of the inside of a shell. The water came in without sound. And there had been a light on that water, a single line of it running from the place where he stood out toward the horizon, gold as a struck coin, thin as a thread pulled from a hem. He had wanted to follow it. He had known, in the manner of dreams, that if he followed it he would find someone waiting who had been waiting a very long time. He lay there and tried to keep the shore. It went anyway, the way water goes through fingers, and left him with the ceiling beams and Ron's foot hanging off the far bed and the ordinary morning pressing in. Downstairs the kitchen was already full. Mrs. Weasley moved between the range and the long table with three things happening at once behind her back: a knife working through a loaf on its own, a kettle lifting itself, the wireless muttering the shipping forecast that nobody in a landlocked house had any use for. Ginny sat with her chin on her hand and toast going cold in front of her, and Hermione was at the far end of the table with her hair still damp and a book open beside her plate, and she looked up when Harry came in and something crossed her face that made him stop in the doorway. "You slept badly," she said. "It was not a question. I slept fine." He took the chair across from her because it was the chair across from her, because 8 weeks of a summer spent mostly in this kitchen had worn that habit into him. Just a strange dream. Her spoon paused over her porridge. She had a particular stillness she went into when a thing snagged her, holding her whole body quiet while her mind sped up. He had learned to read it over the years the way you learn weather, by long living under it. "What kind of strange?" she said. He almost laughed it off. He had a dozen ways of laughing things off. It was nearly the first magic he had ever learned, long before Hogwarts, in a cupboard under a staircase. But she was watching him, and the shore was still close enough to touch, and he found he did not want to lie to her about it. There was a beach, he said, empty, and this light on the water going out to the middle of the sea like a wire, but gold. It wanted me to follow it. He turned his mug in his hands. "That's it. That's the whole thing. Stupid." Hermione did not say it was stupid. She had gone white around the mouth, and she closed her book without marking her place, which for her was practically a scream. "Say the color again," she said. "Gold, and the sky, pale pink, sort of like the inside of a shell." He had not told her about the shell. He was sure he had not. He watched her hear it and go stiller still. "There was someone," she said, "at the end of the light, waiting." The kitchen went on around them, the knife sawing, the kettle settling, Mrs. Weasley asking Ginny whether she had packed her second-best robes. None of it reached the two of them at the end of the table. Harry set his mug down carefully, with the care of a man handling something already cracked. "How do you know that?" he said. "Because I was there." Her voice dropped. "The same beach, the same light. I've had it 3 nights running, and I told myself it was nerves, going back, everything. That's everything. But it's the same one, Harry, the shell sky, the gold line going out over the water, and I stood at the near end of it, and I knew there was someone at the far end, and I couldn't reach them." She pressed her fingertips flat against the table, one hand to steady it. "I always woke before I could." Across the table, their hands were a foot apart on the scrubbed wood. Neither of them moved. Out in the garden, a gnome shrieked and was flung over the hedge by a wand neither of them saw, and Mrs. Weasley called that breakfast was breakfast and would not eat itself, and the ordinary world rolled on with its ordinary noise, and in the middle of it Harry looked at Hermione and understood that they had both walked the same shore in the same dark, on the same 3 nights, and had each been waiting for the other without knowing it. "That's not possible," he said, "because one of them had to." "No," Hermione agreed. She did not sound convinced. She sounded instead like someone standing at the lip of a very deep well and hearing, far down, the sound of water. "It isn't." They finished breakfast without speaking of it again, because Ron thumped down the stairs demanding to know where his second-best jumper had got to, and because there was a train to catch and trunks to drag, and Mrs. Weasley to embrace one final time on the doorstep, while she pretended not to be crying into Harry's collar. She held him a beat longer than she held her own, as she did at every parting, and turned it into a fuss about the state of his jumper so that neither of them would have to name it. Then she took Hermione by both shoulders and looked at her a moment without speaking, and whatever she saw made her pull the girl in hard and say into her hair, quietly enough that only the doorstep heard, "You two look after each other up there, you especially. He listens to you." Hermione promised that she would. She did not know yet how large a promise she had made, but all through the morning Harry carried the shore in him like a stone in a pocket, warm from being held, and every time he caught Hermione's eye across the churn of the departure he found her carrying it too. The Hogwarts Express pulled out of King's Cross under a low gray ceiling of cloud, and for the first hour it felt almost like every other year, which was its own kind of strange because nothing else did. There were Aurors on the platform now. Two of them stood at the barrier in plain robes that fooled nobody, watching the families come through the brick in twos and threes, their eyes never resting. There were fewer families than there should have been. Some of the compartments that ought to have been loud with reunion were dark and empty, and nobody said aloud whose they were, though everybody knew a name or two. Over the summer, the Prophet had run its columns of the missing in smaller and smaller type, in the apparent hope that shrinking the letters might shrink the count. It had not. Harry, Hermione, and Ron found their compartment near the rear and put their trunks up and shut the door against the corridor, and for a while the ordinary work of settling in did what it always did, which was to make the world feel survivable. Ron had a new box of something from the twins that fizzed alarmingly, and he wanted them all to admire the danger of it. "You put one in your mouth," Ron said, holding up a sweet, the ominous violet of a fresh bruise, "and for exactly 90 seconds you speak only in rhyme." Fred timed it. George couldn't stop reciting limericks at a customer's grandmother. Genuinely couldn't. She bought 40. "That's not a joke, that's a curse with a price tag," said Hermione, but she was smiling, and she took one when he offered and turned it over in her fingers and put it back because she was Hermione. Ginny came by with Neville, who had grown over the summer into shoulders he did not yet know what to do with, and who reported that his grandmother had made him practice defensive charms every morning before breakfast and that he had a bruise to prove the last one. "She had you disarm her?" Hermione asked. "She had me try," said Neville. "I'm getting better at ducking. Gran says ducking is underrated. She says half the wizards who died in the last war died standing up straight to prove they weren't afraid." He said it plainly, without drama, and the compartment went quiet a moment because it was the kind of thing people said now, the kind of thing a grandmother said to a boy over breakfast, and nobody thought it strange anymore, which was the strangest part of all. It was good, the ordinary noise of it, when it came back. Harry let it wash over him and watched the country go by in wet green streaks and did not talk much, which nobody remarked on, because he never talked much on the first day, and they had all long since made room for it. But under the talk he was aware of Hermione across the compartment the way you are aware of a lamp in a dim room, without looking straight at it. And once, when the trolley came and she reached past him for the latch of the door at the same moment he reached for it, their hands met on the cold metal. It was nothing. It was the smallest contact, two people fumbling for one handle. But a line of warmth went up his arm from the place where her fingers crossed his, sudden and clean, like the first sip of tea on a raw day, and at the same instant a light no bigger than a spark leapt between their knuckles, gold, gone before he could be sure he had seen it. They both went still. Ron, folding a chocolate frog into his mouth, saw nothing. Ginny was laughing at something Neville had said. The trolley witch waited with her professional patience for someone to actually open the door. And Harry and Hermione looked at their hands, still crossed on the latch, and then looked up at each other, and it was the shore again, the same knowledge without words, the same well opening under their feet. Hermione took her hand back first. She did it evenly, without hurry, and asked the witch for a pumpkin pasty in a voice that did not shake, and paid, and gave Harry his change, and only when the trolley had rattled on down the corridor did she meet his eyes again. "Tonight," she said very low under the noise of the compartment, "after the feast, when they've all gone up." He nodded. There did not seem to be anything to add. Outside the window the rain had thickened into the kind that would run all night, and the light had gone the color of pewter, and the train carried them north into it, toward the only place he had ever thought of as home, and the warmth of her hand stayed on his knuckles like a mark he could not see. Somewhere past the Midlands the train slowed without warning, the wheels dropping through their long complaint from a rush to a crawl to a shuddering halt in open country, and the corridor outside filled with the sound of a door thrown back and boots on the boards. Ron sat up. Ginny's hand found her wand without her seeming to notice it had. Down the length of the carriage came two Aurors in traveling cloaks, checking compartments one by one, and behind their courtesy was a hardness that the courtesy did not trouble to hide. "Routine," the first one said when he slid their door back, though nothing about the year was routine. He was young and tired, and his eyes went from face to face and settled, as everyone's eyes had settled for 6 years, on the scar under Harry's fringe. "Potter, you'll forgive me. I'm to confirm every student on the manifest by sight until Hogsmeade. Orders." His gaze moved on around the compartment, counting, and paused a beat on Hermione, and then on the narrow air between her seat and Harry's. In the same manner the pale man at the staff table would pause on it hours later, though Harry had no way yet of knowing to be troubled by the repetition. "Miss Granger, Weasley's, Longbottom." He nodded once and drew the door shut and moved on, and the train hung in the wet fields a while longer before it gathered itself and rolled north again. "They never used to board the train," Hermione said quietly, watching the rain-blurred country begin to move once more. "Not in first year, not even third after Sirius. They've started because they're afraid, and they've the right to be, and I keep thinking of that footnote, coveted and feared, and wondering how many people on this train would be very interested to learn what happens when your hand crosses mine on a latch." She turned from the glass. We tell no one, Harry, not Ron, not yet, not until I know what it is. It's not a secret because I'm ashamed of it. It's a secret because a thing that rare is a thing that people take." He nodded. She was right, and being right was the least alarming part of what she had said, and he sat with the rest of it as the fields darkened toward the mountains. He spent the remainder of the journey pretending to sleep against the glass, watching her reflection in it, read the same page of her book 4 times over without turning it. The great hall did what it always did, which was to take a person's breath and give it back changed. The ceiling churned with the same rain that fell outside, and 10,000 candles hung in the dark of it, and the 4 long tables ran gold with plates and goblets under the drift of the flames. But there were empty benches this year that in other years had been full, and there were faces at the staff table Harry did not know. One of them he found himself watching. A man sat 3 seats down from Professor McGonagall, neither young nor old, with pale hair combed back from a high forehead and hands folded before him on the table with the composure of a man in a portrait. He did not eat. He did not speak to his neighbors beyond the least courtesy. He watched the students come in table by table, and his gaze moved over the hall with a slow and cataloging patience, and when it crossed the Gryffindor bench it slowed further and passed over Harry and passed over Hermione 2 seats down and came back to rest on the space between them for the length of a held breath before it moved on. Harry could not have said why the small pause fixed itself in his memory. He only knew that it did. "Who's that?" he murmured to Ron. "By McGonagall." "Pale doesn't eat," Ron craned. "No idea, new face, Percy knows every dull man in Britain." He lost interest as the plates began to fill. "Blokes probably from the ministry. Half the staff table's ministry now, Dad says. They send people up to keep an eye on us mostly, I reckon, in case one of us turns out to be, you know." He did not finish it. Nobody finished that sentence anymore either. The sorting had been a subdued thing, the smallest first-year class in living memory filing up under the eyes of a hall that no longer clapped quite so loudly, because clapping felt like a thing from before. The hat had sung, and its song had been about the 4 houses standing together, and it had sung that song before, and everyone understood why it was singing it again. Harry watched the little ones settle at the tables, 11 years old, most of them not knowing yet the full shape of what waited past the school gates, and he thought of himself at 11, small and half-starved and dazzled, and hoped without much faith that these would get a gentler run of it than he had. Dumbledore rose to speak, and the hall did not settle into its usual restless hush so much as lean toward him, hungry for whatever he would say. He did not say very much. He welcomed them, the new and the returning. He named the Forbidden Forest forbidden, as he did every year, and the list of banned items now long enough that Filch had taken to posting it in 3 columns. And then he stood a moment with his hands folded and his blue eyes going down the tables, table by table, committing each young face to memory against some future need. "These are dark days," he said at last, and the candles seemed to dim to hear him, though perhaps that was only the rain thickening overhead. "I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. You have all lost, or you all know someone who has, and I could stand here and speak to you of vigilance and of courage, and those would be true words and worth the saying." He paused. "But I find this year that I would rather speak to you of a smaller thing and a stronger one. Look to your left, look to your right." A rustle went through the hall as uncertainly hundreds of heads turned. "The person beside you is the reason any of this is worth defending. Not the castle, not the magic, the person beside you. Guard them and let them guard you, and you will find you have guarded everything that matters. That is all. That, and the news that the treacle tart tonight is particularly good." The hall laughed because he had let them, and the tension broke like a held breath let go, and the plates filled, and the ordinary blessed clatter began. But Harry had turned his head to the right when the headmaster said it, and Hermione had turned to the left, and they had met each other's eyes across the 2 feet of bench between them, and neither of them had laughed. And when Harry glanced back up at the staff table, the pale man 3 seats from McGonagall was not looking at Dumbledore at all. He was looking at the small distance across the Gryffindor bench where 2 heads had turned toward one another, and his folded hands had come apart, and one of them rested now against his chest over his heart, in the absent manner of a man pressing on an old wound. The fires had burned low in the common room, and the last of the 5th years had been chivied up to bed, and even Ron had given up and gone yawning up the stairs with a mumbled instruction not to stay up plotting whatever they were plotting. The 2 of them sat alone in the red dark with the last log ticking in the grate. For a while neither spoke. It was enough, after the summer and the train and the crowded hall, simply to be in the same quiet. Hermione had drawn her knees up into the corner of the sofa and pulled her sleeves down over her hands, and Harry sat at the other end with his head back against the cushion, watching the smoke go up the chimney, and the room held them both as it had held them for 6 years, familiar to the grain of the floor. "Give me your hand," Hermione said. He turned his head. She had unfolded herself and was sitting forward, her face lit orange along one side by the coals, and she held her own hand out across the space between them, palm up, steady. "I want to see if it happens on purpose," she said. On the train it was an accident. If it's real, if it's a thing and not nerves and not two people frightening each other into imagining it, then it should happen when we mean it to. That's how you tell. She said it in her lesson voice, the one she used to hold the enormity of a thing at arm's length while she took its measure, and it steadied him to hear it, though he did not have the truer word out yet, or did not let himself lift it to the light. He put his hand in hers. For a moment there was only the warmth of her skin and the small roughness of the callus on her middle finger where the quill sat, and the coals ticking and the rain. And then it came, the same warmth as the train, but rising now, running up his arm and into his chest, and settling there behind the breastbone like a coal of its own, gentle, alive. Between their two clasped hands the light kindled. It did not leap and vanish this time. It grew. A thread of gold no thicker than a hair drew itself out of the place where his palm met hers, and it did not fall or fade but hung taut and shining, and when Hermione slowly drew her hand back an inch the thread stretched with it and did not break, spanning the widening gap between them, luminous in the red dark, humming with a note too low to hear and easy to feel. "Oh," Hermione said, just that, all her lesson voice gone out of her. Harry could not speak at all. The thread ran from his hand to hers, and where it touched him it was warm, and along it, faint as a pulse felt through a wall, he could feel something that was not his own and was not strange either. It was her. He could feel her there at the far end of the light, exactly as he had felt her at the far end of the shore, and the knowledge that had haunted 3 nights of dreaming came fully awake in him at last. Not a stranger, never a stranger, her. Og broke and settled in the grate and threw up a fan of sparks, and the sound of it startled them both, and their hands came apart, and the thread thinned and dimmed and drew back into them like breath drawn in. The room was only firelight again, but the warmth stayed, banked low behind Harry's ribs, and when he looked at Hermione he saw by the color climbing in her face that it had stayed in her too. That was real, he said. Yes, she had wrapped both arms around her knees again. That was very real. She was looking at her own hand, turning it over in the coal light, and when she spoke again her voice had gone quiet in a new way, not frightened but wide, like a person standing under a sky bigger than any they had known was there. "Harry, I don't think this is something that's happening to us. I think this is something that's true about us, and has been, and we're only now old enough, or close enough, or something enough for it to show." He did not understand all of it. But he understood the last part, close enough, because he had spent a summer being nearer to her than to anyone alive and had thought it ordinary, and now he saw the shape under the ordinary, and it was very large. "One more thing," Hermione said. "One test, then bed, I promise." She rose and crossed to the window and stood with her back to him, a dark shape against the moon-washed glass. "I'm going to think of something, a place, and I want you to close your eyes and tell me if anything comes. Don't try, just tell me what you get, even if it's nothing, especially if it's nothing." He closed his eyes. For a moment there was only the coals and the cooling room and the sound of her breathing across it, and then unbidden, quiet as a scent carried in on a draught, it came to him. The smell of cut grass warmed by sun, a low white gate, a hedge heavy with the drone of bees, a garden he had never seen. A garden that was hers, he understood, some green square in the ordinary Muggle world where a small girl had once read whole afternoons away and been perfectly, unremarkably safe. "There's a gate," he said, eyes shut. "White, and bees, a lot of bees, and everything smells like the grass just got cut, and it's warm. And nothing bad has ever happened there, that's the main thing about it, that nothing bad has ever." He opened his eyes. Hermione had turned from the window. She had a hand pressed flat to her chest over the hidden mark, and in the moonlight her face was doing something complicated and quiet, and she did not speak for a moment because she did not seem able to. "That's my grandmother's garden," she said at last, "in Kent. I haven't thought of it in years. I was thinking of it just now because it's the safest place I know, and I wanted the safest place I know tonight." She lowered her hand. "You saw inside my head, Harry, not words, the feeling of it. The warm and the safe. Then let's find out what it is," he said, "properly together, whatever it takes." That, said Hermione, was never in question. And she almost smiled and did not quite, and reached over and squeezed his hand once quick and let it go before the thread could kindle again, because a person could take only so much wonder in one night before they had to sleep. At the foot of the stairs she paused. "For what it's worth," she said, not quite turning back, "I'm glad it was you." End of the light on the beach. "I kept dreaming there was someone waiting there 3 nights, and I kept being certain that whoever it turned out to be would change everything, and part of me dreaded it because I like my everything the size it is. And then it was you, and it didn't feel like everything changing. It felt like something I already knew being said out loud at last." And she went up and left him in the firelight with that to hold, and he held it a long time after her door had shut. He found the mark that night, undressing for bed. The dormitory was dark and full of the breathing of the others. Ron and Neville and Dean and Seamus each sunk in the first hard sleep of a term's first night, and Harry stood by his 4-poster with the curtains half drawn and pulled his shirt over his head, and the moonlight that had come out with the ending of the rain lay in a long bar across his chest, and there over his heart, where there had been nothing his whole life, there was a mark. It was faint. He might have missed it had the moon not fallen just so. A tracery of fine lines, gold-brown against his skin, no bigger than a galleon, and it was not a scar and not a bruise and not any pattern he could name at first. He touched it. It was warm. Not fever warm, not the warmth of skin, but the particular living warmth of the thread in the coal behind his ribs. And when his fingertips found it, the coal answered, and far off, muffled by stone and distance and the whole sleeping castle between them, he felt an echo, and knew that in a tower on the other side of the school Hermione had at that very moment pressed her own hand to her own chest and found the twin of it. He crossed to the window to see the mark better in the moon. Under the fall of pale light, the lines resolved themselves, and he saw that they were not random after all. They made a pattern he half knew, points connected by faint lines, some bright, some dim, arranged in a shape that pulled at his memory until it gave stars. It was a scatter of stars, a small constellation he could not have named, drawn over his heart in threads of gold, and as he watched, holding himself still in the cold by the glass, one of the points at the pattern's heart brightened slow, the way a star comes out at dusk, and then another beside it, until two of them burned steady and warm against his skin while the rest held faint around them. 2 stars bright, the rest waiting. He did not need Hermione's books to tell him what the 2 bright ones were. He stood at the window with his hand over the mark and the whole castle asleep around him and the moon on the wet grounds far below, and he let himself feel, along the thread that ran through stone and dark to a tower he could not see, the exact and steady warmth of the second star, alive, awake, pressing her own palm to her own chest and thinking of him. Above the grounds the real sky had cleared, and its stars stood out cold and uncountable over the ridge of the forest, wheeling their slow ancient wheel as they had wheeled over every night of his life and every night before it, indifferent, magnificent, older than any war. He looked from them to the 2 small stars burning warm on his own chest, and the strangeness of the comparison held him at the glass. Those out there were fires so far off that their light had left them before his grandparents were born. A person could wish on them a whole life long and never be answered. These 2 he could cover with a thumb, and they answered him. Somewhere under this same roof a girl carried their twin, and the light that ran between the 4 points was not cold at all, and had not traveled across any gulf to reach him, because it had started inside him and inside her and had only been waiting for the 2 of them to hold still long enough to see it. For a long while he did not move. The war was out there, past the black line of the forest, past the mountains, gathering itself in rooms he could not see towards some hour he could not name. It had taken his parents before he could remember them, and it meant to take more. He had known that since he was 11 and had carried the knowing the way a person carries a limp, so long that it stopped feeling like an injury and started feeling like a walk. But standing at the glass with 2 stars burning warm over his heart, he found the knowing had shifted its weight. He was not, he understood, going to face whatever came alone. He had never been going to. He simply had not had the map of it until now, and here it was, drawn on him in gold, a thread running out of his own chest toward the one fixed point in all the turning dark that he would have chosen if anyone had ever thought to ask him what he wanted. Nobody ever had. He had decided at the window that it did not matter. He knew the answer regardless. They compared them in the morning, in the gray before the others were down, in the empty common room with the fire cold. She wore a scarf she did not need and drew it aside just far enough, and he undid the top button of his shirt, and there in the thin dawn light the 2 marks lay revealed, and they were the same scatter of stars, the same 2 points burning at the heart of it, exactly precisely the same as though one hand had drawn both. Hermione had brought a book down with her, of course. It was old and it was not one of hers, and Harry recognized the smell of the library on it, dust and long shelving. "I couldn't sleep," she said, which needed no explaining. "So I went and the library's warded at night, but there's a way. I worked it out 3rd year and never told you. Don't look at me like that. I found this. It's a general treatise, nothing hidden. It just repeats a phrase I've seen twice now and can't get out of my head." She opened it to a place she had marked and turned it so he could see, and pointed to a line in a cramped old hand. There, anima legata, it means bound soul. The book barely touches it, it's a footnote to a footnote, but the writer calls it the rarest weaving in all the craft, and the most coveted and the most feared. She moved her finger to the next line and read it out, being the joining of 2 lives into one running thread, so that what befalls the one is felt by the other, and their magic, once braided, exceeds by far what either might work alone. She looked up at him. The dawn had come up enough to take the gray out of her face and put warmth in it, and her eyes were steady and awake, and the thing that was most truly Hermione sat plain in them, steadier than any worry the night had put there, which was the wanting to know. "Coveted and feared," Harry repeated. "By who?" "That's the footnote to the footnote." She closed the book over her hand. "It doesn't say, but it says it in a tone I don't like, Harry. Books use that tone about things people have gone to war over. And there's more, there's always more. This is one line in one old book, and I mean to find every other line there is." She said it the way another person might say a prayer. "But I wanted you to see the words before anyone else woke. Bound soul, that's what we are. That's what's been happening since the burrow, since before the burrow. We just didn't have the name." Above them the castle was beginning to stir, door somewhere, a portrait clearing its throat, the great slow waking of 1,000 sleeping people. In an hour the common room would be a churn of robes and lost homework and shouted questions about the timetable, and they would be Harry and Hermione and Ron again, ordinary in the ordinary river of it. But for this last held minute they had the room to themselves, and the two marks lay bare in the dawn, matched star for star, and the thread ran warm and unseen from his heart to hers. Harry looked at the mark on her chest, at the two bright points burning at the center of that little sky, and then at her face above it, and he thought of the shore, and the light going out over the water, and the certainty in the dream that someone had been waiting at the far end for a very long time. He had followed the light. It had led here, to this cold gray morning, and this quiet room, and this girl he had somehow already loved for years without lifting the word to look at it. "Whatever it is," he said, "whoever's coveted it or feared it or whatever your books turn up, I want you to know something before we start pulling on this. Because once you start pulling you won't stop, I know you, and neither will I." He let a breath go. "I'm not frightened of it, the mark, the thread, any of it. I've been frightened of plenty, and I know the feeling, and this isn't it. This is the best thing that's happened to me, that's all. I wanted to say it before it gets complicated." "Because it's going to get complicated." Hermione did not answer at once. She sat with the old book against her chest, over the mark, over the two bright stars, and she looked at him in the strengthening light, and something moved across her face that had nothing of the lesson voice in it. "It's already complicated," she said, but she was not arguing. She reached across the cold hearth and put her hand over his where it rested on the arm of the chair, and the warmth ran up his arm and settled behind his ribs, and between their hands, faint in the growing daylight, the thread kindled and held. "I only mean," she said more softly, "that you don't have to say it before, Harry. You can say it after. There's going to be an after. I intend to make sure of it." For a moment they only sat with that. Then she straightened, and the awake, careful look came back into her, the one that meant she had turned a thing over and found a corner of it she was not willing to leave alone. "And there's one more thing I need you to hear before it gets complicated in the way things get complicated." She kept her hand over his. "A book called it a joining of two lives, and a mark grows over your heart while you sleep, and a light runs between us when we so much as brush hands. All of that reads like something being done to us, something we were assigned before either of us had any say. And I won't have it, Harry, not like that. If this thread is going to run between us for the rest of our lives, then I want it to run because we chose it and keep choosing it every day out in the light, and not because some ancient piece of magic decided our business for us when we were too young to argue." Her chin lifted. "I'll pull this apart in the library until I understand every strand of how it works, but whatever it turns out we get to say what we do about it. That part is ours. I need you to want that too, or I can't want any of it. Hermione." He turned his hand over under hers so their palms met, and did not summon the thread, and did not need to. "I've never in my life had anything that got assigned to me turn out to be good. Everything good I've ever had I had to choose and fight to keep. So yes, we choose it. That's the only way I'd want it either." She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since Kent, since the burrow, since the first gray shore, and she nodded once, and it was settled between them, the shape of the thing they would be, chosen and not merely fated, before either of them had the first idea what choosing it would cost. Somewhere above, a door banged, and Ron's voice came down the stairwell asking whether anyone had seen his other sock, the good one, the one without the hole. The morning was coming for them, and in a minute they would let it. But they sat a moment longer with their hands clasped over the dead fire, and the thread of gold running warm between them, two stars burning at the center of a small and secret sky. And outside the tall windows the sun came up at last over the wet grounds of Hogwarts and turned every raindrop on the glass to a point of light, 10,000 of them, a whole scattered heaven strung across the panes, as though the castle itself had woken in the night to find the same mark drawn over its own old heart. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. What the old books say. Hermione had a method for a mystery, and the method was the library, and the library did not frighten her the way it frightened the rest of them, because she had long ago made a treaty with it that the rest of them never had. She knew which shelves lied and which were merely out of date. She knew that the card index sulked if you were rude to it and would hide a title for a week out of spite. She knew the particular hour just after the supper bell, when Madame Pince retired to the back room to eat a boiled egg in the dark and left the front desk to a stuffed raven that could not tell one student from another, and it was at that hour on the 4th day of term that she led Harry down the long aisle toward the rope that closed off the restricted section. "Don't touch the ones that breathe," she murmured, ducking under the rope with the ease of long practice. "And if a book starts to weep, put it down and walk away. They do it to make you feel guilty enough to check them out." Here, she had a list. Of course she had a list. 3 days of daylight reading in the ordinary stacks had given her a scaffold of references, each one pointing deeper, each one hedged and half erased, and every arrow on the scaffold pointed here, to the shelves the school did not want a student to reach without a signed note and a reason. The lamps were low and green-shaded, and the air held the particular cold of old paper and older magic, and their 2 wands made a single pool of light between the towering stacks. Harry watched her run a finger along the spines, reading titles in a language he did not have, her lips moving, and he thought that he could have stood there half the night doing nothing but this, watching her hunt, and counted the night well spent. There. She drew a slim volume down from a high shelf, blowing a decade of dust off the top of it. The cover had no words, only a symbol pressed into the leather, two circles overlapping so their edges crossed in the middle, and where they crossed the leather had been tooled with a thread of gold that time had worn nearly away. "Feel that?" Hermione breathed and pressed his hand flat to the cover, and under his palm the crossed circles were warm, the same warmth as the mark on his chest, faint but unmistakable. They took it to a reading table wedged between two stacks where the raven at the front desk could not see them, and Hermione opened it, and for a long stretch she did not speak at all, only read, her finger moving under each line, and Harry sat beside her close enough that their shoulders touched and read what he could over her arm. The book was a history of a kind. It did not explain the bond so much as chronicle it, the handful of times in the long record of the craft that it had appeared, each account brief, each ending badly, which was the thing that took the warmth out of Harry's chest by degrees as he read. A witch and a wizard in the Norman years who could, between them, raise a working no-coven of 12 could equal, and who were burned together by their own frightened neighbors because a power that could not be understood could not be trusted. A pair in the Venetian archives who had been separated by a doge who wanted their braided magic for his wars, and who had each simply stopped, the chronicler wrote, like two halves of a clock taken apart, and died within a day of one another, though neither was ill. Again and again the same three notes, the wonder of it, the coveting of it, and the ruin. "They all die," Harry said low. "Everyone, read them, and they all die. They all die because someone couldn't leave them alone." Hermione did not look up from the page. Her voice had gone flat and precise, the voice she used for a problem she meant to solve rather than a horror she meant to grieve. "Look at the pattern, Harry, actually look at it. Not one of these pairs dies of the bond. Every single one dies of somebody else. A mob, a king, a rival who wanted what they had. The bond isn't the danger in these stories. The bond is what everyone else in the story is willing to kill to own." She turned a leaf and another and stopped. "Here, this is the one I wanted you to see." She angled the book into the wandlight. A full page this time in a later hand, the ink browner, the Latin giving way to an old careful English, and at the head of the page a single phrase underlined twice by some long-dead reader who had felt what they were feeling now. "Of the anima legata," Hermione read aloud, barely above a whisper, "the learned are agreed on almost nothing save two matters. The first, that it cannot be counterfeited, nor compelled, nor bought, that it grows only where two souls freely turn toward one another over the turning of the years, and that any who would force the weaving by potion or by curse or by the theft of another's heart achieve only their own unmaking, the false thread recoiling upon the forger. There," she said, tapping the line, "that matters, remember that one." She read on. "The second, that a bond fully woven cannot be broken by any hand but the two it binds. It may be cut at, and the cutting is agony past the telling, and there are those who have spent whole lives learning the art of the cutting. But the thread does not part while both hearts hold. This is the great terror of the pair to those who would master them, and their one true safety, and the whole of their story is the war between the two." The green lamp hissed. Somewhere at the front of the library the raven shifted on its perch and was still. Harry read the lines again over her shoulder, and then a third time, and the shape of the thing they had found settled over him with a weight that was almost restful, because at least now it had edges. "Cannot be broken while both hearts hold," he said, "so all we have to do is hold. All we have to do is hold, while everyone who has ever wanted this for themselves spends a lifetime learning how to make us let go." Hermione closed the book over her finger and looked at him in the green dark, and there was nothing of the lesson voice left in her now. "Harry, people have studied this, not just chroniclers writing down what they heard, studied it, worked at it, made it their life's work, and every one of them wanted the same thing, which is to have what we have without earning it. The book calls them the cutters." She said the word with distaste, as one might name a thing found under a stone. "And I want to know how many of them are still alive." She turned the pages toward the back, where the later hand had made its notes, and slowed. There was a chapter there she had skimmed on the first pass and now came back to, and Harry watched her read it and watched the color go out of her face by careful degrees. She did not read this part aloud. She turned the book instead so that he could see it for himself and pointed to the heading, which was one word in the Old English, of the sundering. The page beneath it did not describe a curse. That was the part that reached into Harry and turned cold. It described a discipline. It spoke of the thread between two bound souls as a living tissue, and of how that tissue might be worked upon from without by one who understood its grain, not severed in a stroke, which the book swore no power on earth could manage, but frayed strand by strand over hours, by holding one of the pair apart from the other and pressing on the bond in the places where it was thinnest, until the pain of it broke the will that held the weave. The book was careful to insist that this had never, in any recorded instance, wholly succeeded, that the thread had always, at the last strand, refused to part. But it noted in the browner ink, in a hand that had clearly wished it did not have to, that the attempt had more than once killed the pair anyway, not by breaking the bond but by breaking the two who carried it, which came, the chronicler observed dryly, to much the same thing from the cutter's point of view. "You see why I want their names," Hermione said, closing the book softly. This isn't a spell someone casts in a temper. This is a craft. It takes study and patience and a captive in years. Nobody stumbles into it. Anyone who knows how to do this went looking for how to do this on purpose for a long time. She held the warm cover a moment against her chest, over the mark neither of them could see. So yes. I want to know how many people in the world have spent their lives learning the sundering, because every single one of them is now, whether they know it yet or not, looking for us. The bond did not wait for them to understand it. Over that first week it grew, quietly, the way ivy grows, so that a person does not see it move but finds one morning that it has covered a wall. It began with feeling. Not thoughts, never quite thoughts, but the color under a thought, carried along the thread the way warmth had been carried at the first touch. Harry would be halfway through a transfiguration lesson, turning a teapot doggedly into a tortoise, and a thin bright thread of impatience that was not his own would run through him, and he would glance across the room and find Hermione 2 seats over, her tortoise finished, her hand not yet raised, waiting for McGonagall to notice, and he would know the impatience had been hers before he ever looked. He learned the flavor of her attention, sharp and clean. He learned the particular gray weight that came off her in History of Magic, and the sudden warmth, quick as a lit match, that reached him across a corridor when she caught sight of him unexpectedly and had not yet arranged her face. They tested it because Hermione tested everything. They stood at opposite ends of the empty charms corridor after hours, and each thought hard of a color, and matched 4 times in 5, and the 5th was near, blue against green, close enough that she declared the miss more interesting than the hits and made him do it again. They sat back to back in the common room with a screen between them, and she drew shapes in the air with her wand, and he named them from the other side without turning, a triangle, a spiral, a 5-pointed star, until Ron came down for a forgotten book and found them sitting spine to spine with their eyes shut and decided he did not want to know. And once on the 7th night the shore came back. Harry knew it the moment he arrived, the shell sky, the soundless water, the gold line running out over the sea, and this time when he looked along the light he saw that the far end of it was no longer empty. She was there. Small with distance, but unmistakably her, standing where the thread met the horizon, and when he lifted a hand she lifted hers, and the light between them brightened along its whole length at the answering, and he began to walk toward her over sand that gave like warm ash underfoot, and she toward him, and though the beach in a dream is as long as a dream wants it to be, this time neither of them woke before they closed the distance. They met in the middle on the bright line, with the tideless sea on either hand, and did not speak, because the place did not seem to be made for speaking, and stood a while with the whole strange, gentle country holding only the two of them. In the morning at breakfast, Hermione sat down across from him and said nothing about a dream, and neither did he, and they looked at each other over the toast rack, and each saw in the other's face that both of them had walked the same shore again and this time reached the end of the light, and the knowing of it carried them through a dull gray Tuesday like a coal in the pocket. But the growing was not all wonder, and Hermione, who missed nothing, did not let Harry pretend it was. "It goes both ways," she said one night low, as they sat over their untouched books in a window seat while the rest of the tower slept. "Everything I feel you feel a shadow of, everything you feel I do." She had her knees drawn up and her chin upon them. "Which is a marvel when what I feel is that I'm glad to see you. It is going to be a different thing entirely the day one of us is afraid or hurt or worse and cannot keep it off the thread. The book said it plainly and I keep circling back to it. What befalls the one is felt by the other. That isn't a poem, Harry, that's a warning. If you are ever badly hurt, I will feel it wherever I am, and I don't yet know what feeling it will do to me." Harry looked out the black window at the grounds far below, the greenhouse roofs catching the last of a low moon, and he thought of every duel and every near miss of the last 6 years, and of the war out there past the mountains getting ready to make more of them, and he understood the size of what she was telling him. It was not only that he would be guarding himself now, it was that every hurt he took he would be handing to her down the thread whether he wished to or not. "Then I don't get hurt," he said, which was a foolish thing to say, and they both knew it, and she reached over in the dark and took his hand, and did not summon the thread, only held on, and the warmth of it went up his arm and settled behind his ribs where the coal lived now, and for a while that was answer enough for both of them. Dumbledore sent for them on the 10th day, and the summons came the way his summonses always came, sideways, with a courtesy that left no room to refuse. A first year found Harry at breakfast with a note that smelled of lemon, and said only that the headmaster wondered whether Mr. Potter and Miss Granger might spare him an hour before their afternoon lessons, and that the password was sherbet lemon, and that he hoped they had both been sleeping well. The last line stopped them both. Hermione read it twice and folded it very small. The office was as it always was, the instruments whirring on their spindle-legged tables, the portraits of old heads dozing or pretending to, Fawkes drowsing on his perch with his plumage banked to embers. Dumbledore rose from behind his desk to meet them, and he looked older than he had at the feast, or perhaps only more careful, And he did not go back behind the desk, but drew 3 chairs together near the fire and gestured them into 2 of them and took the third himself, so that they sat almost knee to knee, 3 people talking and not a headmaster receiving. I will not waste your morning or my own with fencing, he said, so I will tell you what I know and then you will tell me what you know, and between us we may arrive somewhere useful. I have known since the welcome feast. Older magic leaves a scent on the air to those who have spent long enough among it, and the 2 of you, sitting at your house table, gave off the oldest scent I have met in 50 years. He looked from one of them to the other over the half-moons of his glasses. You are anima legata. Bound souls, I would ask if you knew, but I can see that you do, and I can see by Miss Granger's satchel, which appears to contain half of the restricted section, that you have already gone hunting. Good, tell me what you found. So Hermione told him in order the chronicles and the pattern and the 2 agreements of the learned, and Dumbledore listened without interrupting, his fingertips together, his eyes on the fire, and when she had finished he was quiet a while before he spoke. You have found the true shape of it, which is more than most who spend a career on the question ever do. He turned his gaze on them. So let me give you the pieces you cannot find in a book because they were never written down, being too dangerous to write. The first is this: a bond such as yours is not merely rare. It is, in the whole living memory of magical Britain, unique. There is no other. You are not 2 among many. You are the only 2, and that is a fact that changes the arithmetic of your lives entirely, because a thing of which there is only one in the world is a thing that only one person need decide to possess. The fire cracked. Fawkes lifted his head and looked at them with one dark ancient eye. The second piece is older, and I give it to you unwillingly, because it is the kind of knowledge that can bend a young life out of true if it is carried wrong. Dumbledore's voice dropped, and the whirring instrument seemed to slow to hear him. There is a line, very old, older than the school, that has been passed down among those who study these matters, half prophecy and half warning, and it concerns exactly your case. It runs, when 2 are woven into one flame, the deathless shall find their ending. He let it sit in the warm air. You will understand why I do not say the rest of that thought aloud in a castle with 100 portraits and a war at its gates. I will only say that there is one being in this world who has spent his whole long unnatural life on a single labor, which is the defeat of his own death. And there is one thing on this earth that the oldest lore says can undo him, and it is not a curse, and it is not an army, and it is not a blade. It is a flame woven of 2 souls freely given to one another. That flame, until this autumn, did not exist. It exists now. It is sitting in my 2 spare chairs, drinking cocoa it has not touched, and it does not yet fully understand what it is. Nobody spoke. Harry looked at Hermione, and Hermione looked at the fire, and the coal behind his ribs was very warm and very quiet, and along the thread he could feel her turning the words over as she turned everything over, examining, measuring, declining to be cowed by a thing, until she had first taken it fully apart and understood it. Harry found his voice, and the question that came out was not the one he had meant to ask. My mum and dad, he said. Were they this? Is that why he stopped? Because he was not sure what he was asking, only that a door had opened in him and this was standing behind it. Dumbledore looked at him kindly for a moment before he answered. No, he said. They loved each other very much, your parents, as much as any 2 people I have known. But they were 2, Harry, joined by choice and by vow and by the ordinary daily labor of a shared life, which is the truest magic most of us are ever given and is not to be despised. They were not this. What your mother did for you at the end was something else again, older and stranger, a mother's willing death laid over a child like a cloak. That was its own ancient magic, and it saved you, and it is not what sits in that chair now. He leaned forward, and the firelight moved on his face. I tell you this so that you will not go looking for your parents in the thread. You will not find them there. You will find only Miss Granger and yourself, and the whole of it made new between the 2 of you, owed to no one who came before. That is not a smaller thing than what your parents had. In some lights it is a larger one. But it is yours, and it began with the 2 of you, and you must not let anyone, living or dead, tell you that you inherited it or were fated into it. You grew it. That distinction is going to matter more than you can yet see. Along the thread Harry felt Hermione turn toward that last, felt it land in her exactly where her own conviction already lived, the insistence she had spoken in the dawn, that whatever they were they had chosen and would keep choosing. She did not say anything. She did not have to. He felt her agreement come down the thread warm and certain, and he held to it. You are telling us, Hermione said at last slowly, that Voldemort will want us dead, more than he already does, that the thing between us is precisely the thing he cannot allow to exist. I am telling you, said Dumbledore gently, that you have a great many hours of study ahead of you and that you must not stop, because the more you understand of what you are, the harder you will be to take. And I am telling you one thing more, and then I will let you go to your lessons. He rose, and they rose with him, and at the door he paused with his hand upon it and looked down at them with the whole weight of his years in his face. He is not the only one who will come. He is the most dangerous, but he is not the only one. There are others in this world who covet the bond not to destroy it, but to have it, to study it, to take it apart and learn its working and put it back together in their own hands. They will not come with curses. They will come with courtesy and with sympathy and with the offer of help, and they will be, in their way, far harder to refuse. Guard yourselves against the ones who mean you harm, but guard yourselves twice as hard against the ones who mean they will say to help. He opened the door. Sleep well, truly. Do try. The two of you are going to need it. The name found Hermione before the man did. It was 3 days after the office, in the ordinary stacks this time, in a modern shelf of monographs and offprints, that Hermione was combing on the theory that whatever the ancient chroniclers knew, someone more recent had surely tried to know it too. She came to the common room after supper with 2 spots of color high on her cheeks and a thin gray pamphlet held between 2 fingers, holding it away from herself as one holds a thing one does not trust. Look at what was sitting on an open shelf, she said, and put it on the table in front of Harry and Ron, who was there, lengthen too. The pamphlet was perhaps 40 pages, cheaply bound, its cover the color of a rain cloud, and its title was printed plainly across the top, on the ligature of souls, toward a practical recovery of the lost weaving. And below the title, where the author's name went in small capitals, see vein. Practical recovery, Hermione said, and the 2 words came off her tongue like something spat out. He doesn't want to chronicle it, Harry. He doesn't want to admire it in an old book. The whole thing is a research program, 40 pages on how one might reconstruct a soul bond deliberately from first principles if only one had a living specimen to study. He's very frank about the difficulty. He's very frank about the fact that no living specimen exists. She looked up. It was published 11 years ago. It's been sitting on that shelf for 11 years being read by nobody because there was nothing to study. And now there is. Vain, Ron said, frowning at the cover. Vain, why do I? He turned and looked up at the ceiling in the direction of the great hall 2 floors below, and his face changed. That bloke, the pale one at the staff table, first night. Percy owled me about the staff. Mum made him. She wanted to know who was minding us. There's a visiting fellow this year, some ministry-connected scholar giving a lecture course to the 7th years on advanced defensive theory. Optional, cash and Vain. He looked between them. That's not it. That can't be the same person. But it was, and all 3 of them knew it was, and the knowing sat down at the table with them and did not leave. The pale man who had watched the space between them at the feast, who had pressed a hand to his own chest over an old wound while 2 heads turned toward one another down the Gryffindor bench, was the author of a 40-page program for the manufacture of the exact thing that now, uniquely in all the world, existed between Harry and Hermione. And he had come to the castle, and he had come this year. Hermione took the pamphlet back and turned to the last page, where a photograph had been printed small and gray, the standard author's likeness. A younger Cash and Vain looked out of it, unsmiling, and beside him in the frame, half turned away, stood a woman whose face the printing had blurred, and the younger Vain's hand rested on her shoulder in a manner that had nothing of the scholar in it and everything of the man. Hermione studied it a long moment. He had someone, she said quietly. Look. 11 years ago he stood for a photograph with his hand on a woman's shoulder, and then he wrote 40 pages on how to build a bond of souls from nothing. People don't spend their lives trying to build a thing from nothing unless they've lost the real one. She set the pamphlet down. That doesn't make him safe, Harry. Dumbledore told us. The ones who come to help are the worst. It only means he won't be simple. He won't be Voldemort. He'll have a reason, and the reason will be sad, and he'll believe it, and that is exactly what will make him dangerous. His lecture course was advertised on the 7th-year notice board in a hand that no one recognized, black ink on cream, unfussy. Advanced Theory of Magical Defense, 6 evenings, Mr. C. Vane, all senior students welcome, attendance at your own discretion. Ron declared he would rather boil his own head. Hermione declared they were going, both of them, and that discretion had nothing to do with it. He's watched us since the feast, she said, pinning the parchment flat with 2 fingers. I want to watch him back, and I want to hear how a man who spent 40 pages on the theft of a soul bond talks when he thinks he's only teaching defense. People give themselves away in the parts they think are safe. The classroom he had been given was the old one on the 4th floor with the high windows, and he had rearranged it. The desks were gone. In their place he had set the chairs in a single wide arc facing a bare space, no lectern, no board, nothing between him and the room, and perhaps a dozen 7th years had come out of curiosity and sat scattered along the arc with the wariness of people who did not know why they had. Vane stood in the empty middle in dark gray robes, unarmed, his hands loose at his sides, and he waited until the last of them had settled and the silence had gone taut before he spoke, and his voice, when it came, was low and unhurried and pitched so that a person had to lean the smallest degree toward him to catch it, which meant that within a minute the whole room was leaning. Everything you have been taught about defense, he said, is a lie of omission. You have been taught spells. Shield charms, counterjinxes, the disarming of an opponent, useful, necessary, and beside the point. He turned slowly, taking in the arc of young faces. A spell is a tool, and a tool can be dropped or snapped or taken from your hand. I am not here to give you more tools. I am here to teach you the one thing no enemy can disarm, which is the correct understanding of where power actually comes from. His gaze traveled the arc and came, without hurrying and without lingering, across the 2 seats where Harry and Hermione sat and moved on and came back to the room at large. It does not come from the wand is a pipe. The question worth a lifetime is not how to hold the pipe. It is what runs through it and from what well, and whether that well is yours alone or shared. Harry felt Hermione go still beside him along the whole length of the thread. Consider, Vane went on, and now his voice had warmed, had taken on the ease of a man arriving at the only subject he had ever loved, the difference between a lamp and a hearth. A lamp burns what it is given and no more. When the oil is out, it is out, and it dies alone in the dark, having shed what light it could. Most wizards are lamps, bright, brief, solitary. But there is another arrangement, very old, very nearly lost, in which two fires are laid so close that they draw on one another, each feeding the other's flame, so that together they burn hotter and longer and truer than either could alone, and neither, while the other lives, can wholly go out. He had stopped turning. He stood quite still in the center of the bare floor. The old texts have a name for it. It does not matter tonight. What matters is that such a thing is real, that it has existed, that it may exist again, and that it is, without exception, the most powerful configuration that magic has ever been known to take. Everything else in this course will be footnotes to that one fact. Any questions we will hold until you have had a week to be disturbed by it. Good evening. And he inclined his head and turned and walked out of his own lecture through the door at the back, leaving a dozen seventh years sitting in a silent arc around an empty floor. And Hermione's hand found Harry's between their chairs and gripped it hard, not to summon the thread, but to keep her own from answering the pull of the thing he had described so exactly and so hungrily, the lamp and the hearth, the two fires laid close, while all the while looking at everyone in the room but them. "Knows," Harry murmured under the scrape of the others rising to go. "He can't know we've told no one, but that whole thing was, he suspects," Hermione said, very low, gathering her bag with hands that were steady because she was making them be. "He came here on a suspicion, and tonight he went fishing in front of a dozen witnesses to see which two of us would stop breathing when he described it, and we very nearly did. We have to be better than that, Harry, starting now. He doesn't know. He is trying to make us tell him, and we are not going to." She stood and slung her bag and did not look back at the door Vane had gone through, and it cost her something not to, and Harry felt exactly how much down the thread. They walked out to the lake on Saturday because Hermione said her head would come off if it read one more page, and because Harry said the same thing in fewer words, and because the day had turned, the way autumn days sometimes turn, mild and gold and false, the sun laying a skin of light over water that would be black with cold by November. They did not talk about the bond, or the pamphlet, or the pale man, or the line Dumbledore had given them. They had made a rule of it without saying so, a rule that an hour by the lake was an hour by the lake and nothing else, and they kept it. Hermione took her shoes off and put her feet in the shallows and yelped at the cold and left them there anyway out of stubbornness. Harry skipped stones badly, and she corrected his throw and skipped 7 times to prove a point. A giant squid tentacle rose lazily 50 yards out, waved once at the sun, and sank. They lay back on the bank with the false warmth on their faces and the real cold coming up through the grass from the earth beneath, and were quiet, and it was the first hour in 10 days that neither of them had spent bracing against something coming. "Give me your hand," Harry said, and it was the reverse of that first night, his request now, and Hermione turned her head on the grass and looked at him a moment before she did it. He had a reason. He was not sure he could have named it before he began, but as their palms met and the warmth ran up his arm, he found the reason waiting for him, and it was this: that everything they had learned in 10 days had been about what the bond meant to other people, what it could do in a war, what it was worth to a dark lord who feared it or a grieving scholar who craved it. Chronicles and prophecies and 40-page programs, all of them about the thread as a thing, a power, a prize. And he wanted, for 1 hour by a cold lake in a false and gentle sun, to hold it as what it actually was, which had nothing to do with any of them. The thread kindled between their clasped hands, gold in the gold light, nearly invisible against the shine on the water. He did not test it or push it or ask it to do a trick. He only held her hand and let it run, and along it, unhurried, he sent her not a color and not a shape, but the plain, uncomplicated truth of the hour, the sun and the cold grass and the good ache of having laughed, and the fact of her there beside him, and how little he would trade it for. And he felt her receive it. He felt her go still beside him on the bank, and then he felt what came back down the thread toward him, warm and unguarded and entirely her own, and he did not have a word for it and did not need one, because it was the same thing he had sent, arriving from the other direction, which is the whole of what the thread was ever for. "You know what I keep thinking," Hermione said after a while, her eyes on the pale sky, her hand still in his. "Every book we've read is written by someone standing outside it looking in. Chroniclers, scholars, Vane, they all describe it like a specimen. And not one of them in all those pages ever once wrote down what it actually feels like, from the inside." She turned her head to look at him, and the gold light was on her face, and she was not in that moment brilliant or principled or anyone's equal or anyone's prize. She was only Hermione on a cold bank in a borrowed sun, holding his hand. "It feels like this, that's the thing none of them know. It doesn't feel like power or prophecy or a lost weaving practically recovered. It It feels like this, like being less alone than a person is supposed to get to be. She looked back up at the sky. I'm not going to let anyone take it apart to find out how it works. Not Voldemort, not a sad man with a pamphlet, not anyone. I decided that in the library 10 days ago, and I've only got surer since. Then that's decided too, Harry said, and it was, and they lay a while longer with the thread running warm and quiet between them and the false sun on their faces, and far off up the slope the castle stood gray against the hills with all its windows blank. She shifted closer on the bank until her shoulder was against his and her head found the hollow below his collarbone, and he lay still under the small weight of her and watched the sky and did not move for horror of breaking the moment. Neither of them called it anything. There had been no declaration by the lake, no scene, no words a chronicler could have written down. There had been only a girl putting her head on a boy's shoulder in a false autumn sun, and a boy letting the whole rest of the world wait while she did. But along the thread, quiet as the tide that never came, something passed between them that both of them received and neither of them named, and it was larger than the lake and older than the castle and belonged, in all the turning world, to no one but the two of them. We ought to go back before it turns cold, Hermione said, and did not move, and neither did he, for a good while yet. They did not see at one of those windows high in a tower that belonged to no house, a figure standing well back from the glass where the light would not catch him. They did not see him watch the two small shapes on the distant bank, nor see him lift a hand slowly to his own chest, over his heart, over the place where a mark would be if a mark had ever been granted him, and hold it there a long moment before he let it fall. They only felt, the both of them at once, a thread of cold run through the golden afternoon, brief and unaccountable, gone before either could name it. And Hermione sat up and looked at the castle and could not have said why, and after a moment they gathered their shoes and walked back up the hill together, closer than two people walking usually stand, into the shadow of the towers, and the false warmth did not last the climb. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Confluence. The room of requirement gave them what they asked for without being asked twice, which was a long stone hall lit by nothing they could find, high as a barn and empty as a held breath, with a floor worn smooth by the practice of people who had needed a place to practice in secret across 1,000 years. They came to it on the fourth evening after the lake, when Hermione declared that reading about a thing had officially become a way of avoiding it. We know what it is, she said, pacing the length of the hall, her voice coming back off the far wall a half-second late. We know what it's worth to Voldemort and what it's worth to Vane and what happened to every pair before us. What we do not know, Harry, is what it can actually do, in our hands, us, and I am not willing to discover it cold in front of someone trying to kill us, so we find out here. You want to train it, Harry said. I want to understand it, which for me is the same verb. She stopped pacing. The chronicles all said the same thing about the braiding. Two souls once joined work a magic that exceeds by far what either might do alone. Fine, that's a claim. I want to see the claim. Cast something at me, something small. And I'll try to, I don't know the word yet, I'll try to be there when you do it. He drew his wand and thought of the smallest working he knew, a charm to lift a feather, and there was no feather, so he thought instead of lifting the loose gray dust off the flags in front of her, and he began the small motion of it, and Hermione closed her eyes and turned toward him along the thread as she had turned toward the color and the shape in their tests, reaching, offering, and the coal behind Harry's ribs woke and poured. The dust did not lift, it rose. All of it, the whole floor of the great hall at once, a low gray tide peeling up off the stone in a single sheet and hanging their waist-high across the entire length of the room, 10,000 motes holding still an air that had no wind, catching a light that had no source, so that for a moment the two of them stood in a field of suspended silver that stretched away into the dark on every side. Harry had not told it to do that. He had told a handful of dust by his own feet to rise, and the working had gone out of him and found her waiting at the far end of it, and what came back was not his charm made bigger. It was his charm made theirs, and theirs was to his what a river is to the rain that feeds it. Oh, Hermione said, opening her eyes, and the sound of it disturbed the field, and the whole silver tide shivered and began slowly to fall, 10,000 motes drifting down through the still air like the quietest snow that ever was, settling on their hair and their shoulders and the backs of their hands, and neither of them moved through the whole long falling of it. That, Harry said, when the last of it had come to rest, was a first-year charm. That, said Hermione, dust silver in her hair, her voice not quite steady, was not. They worked for 2 hours, and every hour taught them a rule they had not known was a rule. They learned that the braiding did not happen by force but by consent, that the harder either of them pushed the less came of it, and that the power rose only when they stopped trying to seize it and simply let the thread run open between them, each holding the other's magic as one holds water, cupped and unclenched. They learned that it would not come to a clenched hand. When a shield charm collapsed and Harry's grip on his own patience slipped, the thread shut down like a door, and the shield that had been a wall of gold light an instant before guttered to nothing, and they had to stop and go quiet and find the open place again before it would answer. They learned, above all, that it was not a weapon they were wielding. It was a third thing they were tending, made of the two of them and belonging to neither, and it answered to trust and to nothing else at all. Near the end of the second hour, Hermione asked for something she had been circling all evening. Patronus, she said, both of us, at the same time, thread open, I want to see what happens. Harry had cast a stag 10,000 times. Hermione's otter had turned back a corridor of Dementors in third year. They stood shoulder to shoulder and raised their wands, and each reached for the memory that answered the charm, and Harry found he did not have to reach far, because the memory was standing next to him, and hers was the same one, and they spoke the incantation together into the open thread. The stag did not come. The otter did not come. What came instead poured up out of the space between their two wands as a single creature that neither of them had ever summoned, and neither could have named, a great four-footed thing of pure silver light, antlered like the stag but quick and low and fluid like the otter, and it did not gallop or dart but moved through the dark hall with a grace that belonged to no living animal, trailing light off its flanks like water off an oar. It circled them once unhurried, close enough that they could see it had no eyes and needed none, and where it passed the cold that lived in the corners of even a warded room drew back, and the whole great space filled with the particular warmth of the mark, of the coal of the thread, made visible and set walking. Came to rest before them and lowered its impossible head, and for one held moment the three of them stood in the ringing hall, Harry and Hermione, in the light they had made between them, and then Hermione let out a breath and it dissolved into a slow rain of silver that lit the flags and went out, and the dark came back, and neither of them said anything for a while. That's not in any book, Hermione said at last, hoarse. A shared corporeal patronus. There's no such thing, Harry. She was looking at the place where it had stood. We are going to have to stop expecting the books to have got here first. They learned a harder rule before the night was out, and it came without warning, the way the important lessons do. Late in the second hour, tired, careless, Harry misjudged a shield and let a rebounding practice hex clip his own forearm, a small burn, nothing, the kind of thing he had shrugged off 100 times. But this time the small hurt did not stay his. It ran down the open thread in the same instant it happened, and across the hall Hermione flinched and clutched her own unmarked arm and hissed through her teeth, and for a moment the two of them stood staring at each other across the dark with the same shallow burn on two different arms, only one of which had been touched. It faded quickly. It left them both quiet. So that's true too, Hermione said, rubbing the arm that had no reason to hurt. What befalls the one is felt by the other. It's not just a line in a chronicle, it's this. She came across the hall and took his burned forearm gently in both hands and looked at it and looked at her own, and Harry watched her do the arithmetic she could never stop doing and watched her arrive somewhere she did not like. We have to be so careful, she said low. Not of the big things, we'll see the big things coming, of exactly this. A stray hex, a careless step, a moment either of us stops paying attention. Because it isn't only that I'll feel it when you're hurt, Harry. It's that when we're fighting and you take a wound, it lands on me in the same second, and if it lands hard enough it drops us both at once, and then there's no one left standing to finish the fight. She set his arm down. The thing that makes us stronger together is the exact same thing that could get us both killed in a single stroke. I need you to hold both of those in your head at the same time, always. I already can't put either of them down. At the end she asked for a target, and the room gave her a straw man on a post at the hall's far end, 40 feet off in the dark, and she took Harry's hand without a word, and they raised their wands together and did not speak an incantation, because by then they had learned they did not always need to, and the light that left the two of them went down the hall as a single braided cord of gold and struck the straw man and did not scorch it or shatter it, but unmade it, unwove it. So that where a figure had stood there was, in the space of an eye blink, only a drift of loose straw settling on the flags and a smell of summer fields, and the post itself stood clean and bare and faintly warm. They stood holding hands in the ringing quiet and looked at what they had done. We are not going to tell anyone we can do that, Harry said. No, Hermione agreed, and her hand tightened in his. No, we are certainly not. They did not go straight back. Neither of them suggested staying. They simply did not leave, and the room, which knew its occupants better than they knew themselves, softened around them without being told, the stone hall drawing into something smaller and warmer, a hearth kindling in a wall that had been bare, 2 chairs that had not been there, a window with rain on it that had not existed a moment before, showing a night that was not quite the real night outside. Hermione sat and Harry sat across from her, and for a while neither of them said anything, because what they had done in the hall was still moving through them, and it wanted quiet to settle. The dust had gone from her hair. The firelight found the line of her jaw and the curve of her hand where it lay open on the arm of the chair, and Harry looked at her and understood that the thing he had been not saying since the burrow had run out of room to hide in. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need you to let me get all the way through it because I've been rehearsing it badly for about 6 weeks, and if you interrupt I'll lose my nerve. She went still and did not interrupt, and he made himself go on. I've been telling myself all of this is the bond, the dreams and the mark and wanting to be wherever you are, all of it. I've been telling myself it's the magic doing it, that the thread pulls us together, and that's what I'm feeling, the pull, and it isn't me, it's just the thing we caught, because that was easier. If it's the magic, then it's not my fault, and I can't get it wrong, and I can't lose you by wanting the wrong thing. He turned his wand over in his hands and made himself put it down. But that's a lie, Hermione, I checked. Dumbledore said we grew this, we weren't fated into it, and he's right, and here's how I know he's right. I want it to be wherever you were before there was ever a thread. I wanted it in the tent and in the hospital wing third year, and on the stairs the night Sirius. I wanted it for years, and I never had a mark or a dream to blame it on. The bond didn't make me love you. The bond is what happened because I already did and was too much of a coward to say, and now I've said it and I'm not sorry, and that's the whole speech. The rain ran on the window that showed a night that was not outside. Hermione had not moved through any of it. When she answered him, she did not answer with words at all, not at first. She rose out of her chair and crossed the small warm space between them and stood in front of him, and he stood too, because a person cannot stay sitting through a thing like that, and she put her hand flat against his chest over the hidden mark over the two bright stars, and she left it there a moment, taking his measure as she did with everything before she trusted it, and then she rose onto the balls of her feet and kissed him. The thread did not flare, it did not need to. It had been running open between them for hours, and it simply went on running, warm and unhurried, carrying between them what the kiss carried, so that each of them felt the other's side of it, the giving and the getting at once, a closed circle with no outside to it and no end. When they came apart, she stayed close, her forehead against his, her hand still on his chest, and she was the one to speak into the small space between their mouths. "You are not a coward," she said. "You are the bravest person I have ever met, and the slowest, and I have been waiting for that speech since roughly the middle of fourth year. And if you had made me wait one more week, I was going to make it myself, and you'd have hated that, because it's my one thing, being first, and I'd have taken it from you." She drew back just far enough to look at him. "And for the record, so that neither of us ever has to be brave about it again, yes. Every year you named and several you didn't, me too. It was never the bond, Harry. The bond only told the truth we were both keeping. Middle of fourth year," he repeated. "You could have said, so could you, and you're older by a month, so it was more your job." She had not moved out of the circle of his arms and did not seem to intend to. "And anyway, I couldn't have said, not then. It's one thing to know a thing about yourself, Harry, and quite another to hand it to somebody who could drop it. I don't hand things over until I'm sure of the ground. You should know that about me now properly before whatever's coming comes. I will follow you into any fire you like. I decided that years ago, but I will make you show me the map first every time, and I will argue with the map, and that is not me doubting you. That is me loving you carefully, which is the only way I know how to love anything." She tipped her head back to look at him. "Can you live with careful?" "Because it isn't going to change, and I'd rather you knew. I've had a lifetime of people loving me carelessly or not at all," he said. "Careful sounds like the best offer I've ever had." And he meant it, and she read that he meant it straight off the thread, and whatever last watchful thing had been holding itself ready in her let go. He kissed her again because there did not seem to be a single reason left in the world not to, and the room made the fire burn a little lower to give them the dark, and outside the window that was not a window the rain that was not rain fell gently on a night that belonged to no calendar, and for that 1 hour there was no war and no prophecy, and no pale man at any window, and no thread in all the turning world worth more than the girl on the other end of this one. The Commons found them, or they found it. Afterward, neither could say which. It began 3 nights later, in the space between waking and sleep, when Harry lay in his four-poster with the mark warm on his chest and reached down the thread out of habit, as he did every night now, to feel the steady far-off warmth of her in her tower and know that she was there and well before he let himself go under. And this time, when he reached, the reaching went somewhere. He did not fall asleep and dream the shore. He walked into it awake, or as near awake as the border of sleep allows, stepped out of the dark behind his own eyes and onto the pale sand under the shell-colored sky, and she was already there, sitting on the strand with her arms around her knees, watching the soundless water, and she turned when he arrived and was not surprised. "You feel that too," she said. It was her voice exactly, though the place had no air to carry it. "It's not a dream tonight, we're not asleep. I've been lying awake for an hour and I'm here anyway. We can come here on purpose." They learned the shore the way they had learned the hall, by careful experiment, night after night, meeting on the bright line where the thread ran out over the sea and walking the strand together and finding out what it was. It was not a place in the world, they were both clear on that from the start. It was a place made of the two of them, a country with a population of 2, the inside of the bond given a sky and a sea so that the parts of them that could not fit into words could have somewhere to stand. When Hermione was troubled, the water darkened. When Harry laughed, the light on it ran brighter. Once, when a nightmare of the old kind came for him, the shore came and took him out of it, or she did, reaching across the sleeping castle and pulling him down onto the sand where the bad dream could not follow, and he woke in the gray morning rested as he had not been rested in weeks and knew who to thank. Time moved strangely there. A quarter hour on the far side of sleep could hold a whole slow evening of the shore, so that they came to steal minutes of ordinary night and spend hours of found time on the strand, walking or not walking, saying the things there was never room to say in the crowded daylight of a castle at war. Harry told her on the shore about the cupboard and the years of it in a flat, plain voice he had never managed above the water, and she did not pity him, which he could not have borne. She only walked beside him on the pale sand and took it in, and when he had finished, took his hand, and the sea brightened by a shade, and that was all, and it was everything. She told him in return about being 11 and clever and friendless, about the particular loneliness of a child who is right too often, and he listened and did not fix it, and the light on the water answered her too. They gave each other on the shore the parts of themselves that the world had taught them to keep folded away, and the country made of the two of them grew a little larger and a little brighter with each thing given, until it was not a strip of beach any more, but a whole coast running off into a gentle distance, built out of everything they had each spent a lifetime keeping back from everyone else. "It's ours," Hermione said, one night, standing ankle-deep in the tideless sea with the shell sky over her. "Do you understand what that actually means, Harry? No one else can come here. It isn't a room with a door someone could pick. It's made out of us. As long as we hold the bond, there is one place in all of existence that Voldemort cannot enter, and Vane cannot study, and the Ministry cannot subpoena, and no war can reach. We have a country. It's very small, and it has a population of 2, and I love it more than anywhere I have ever been." She turned to look at him across the bright water. "Whatever happens out there, no matter how bad it gets, we can always come here. Remember that. If they ever take everything else, they can't take the shore." He waded out to her and took her hand in the warm sea under the impossible sky, and did not answer, because some promises are better kept than spoken, and stood with her at the center of the one place in the universe that belonged wholly to the two of them, and meant with everything in him to keep it. Vane's course went on, and they kept going to it, because Hermione would not be driven off by a man she had decided to study in return, and because staying away would itself have told him something. His second evening he spoke of the will, and his third of sacrifice, and each lecture was, on its surface, an ordinary and even brilliant treatment of defensive theory, and each one had, buried in it like a hook in bait, a single passage about the joining of two magics that he delivered to the whole arc of students, while contriving never once to look at the two he meant it for. It was after the fourth evening that he spoke to them directly for the first time, and he chose his ground with a care that Hermione recognized and hated. He did not summon them. He simply lingered by the tall windows arranging his papers until the others had drifted out, and when Harry and Hermione rose to go he said, without turning, in that low voice that made a room lean, "Miss Granger, a moment. Had a look on your face during the lecture that I have been hoping to provoke in someone all term. You disagreed with me. I should very much like to know where." Hermione stopped. Harry felt the calculation run through her down the thread, the swift weighing of whether silence or engagement gave more away, and he felt her decide that a mind like Vane's would read silence as the louder answer. "You keep saying the two-fire magic is the most powerful configuration magic can take," she said. "You say it every night. And you say it the way a man talks about a thing he's lost, not a thing he's studied. So I disagree with your tense, Mr. Vane. You describe it as gone, as lost, as a weaving to be recovered, and I don't think a thing like that is ever really lost. I think it just declines to grow where it isn't wanted or isn't earned and waits." For the first time Vane turned and looked at her fully, and his pale face had gone still and attentive, and something moved behind his eyes that had grief in it and hunger in it and no cruelty at all, which was worse than cruelty would have been. "Earned," he repeated softly. "You used the word earned. Do you know, in all the years I have given to this question, and I have given it more than you have been alive, hardly anyone uses that word. They say rare, they say lost, they say powerful. You said earned." He set his papers down. "I had a wife, Miss Granger. I will tell you that much because you will find it out regardless, and I would rather you had it from me. We were close, closer than most, and I spent a great many years persuading myself that what we had was the beginning of the very thing I lecture on, the two fires laid near, and that if I only studied hard enough I could tend it into the full weaving before." He stopped. "Before there was no more time, I was wrong. We were near, and near is not the thing, and I have spent every year since learning precisely how far near falls short, and whether the distance can be closed by knowledge where it was not closed by love." His gaze rested on her and moved once deliberately, now to Harry and back. "I would give a great deal to meet one day a pair in whom it had actually taken, to learn from them what I could not make happen for myself, purely as a scholar, you understand, if you should ever hear of such a pair. I would be so very grateful to be told." "I'll be sure to mention it," Hermione said, "if I ever hear of one," and she took Harry's arm and they walked out unhurried, not looking back, and it was not until they were 3 corridors away and around a corner that either of them let out the breath they had been holding, and the thread between them ran cold and fast with the same thought, which needed no saying. He was no longer fishing. He was certain. He had stopped asking whether they existed and started asking to be given them, gently, sadly, with a dead wife laid on the table between as the price of their sympathy, and that was a far more dangerous man than the one who had merely watched them across a feast. He believes every word of it, Hermione said low when they were moving again. That's what makes my skin crawl, Harry. He isn't lying. He lost her and he's grieving, and he genuinely only wants to understand. And he will take us apart strand by strand to do it and weep the whole time and mean the tears. Dumbledore told us, guard yourselves twice as hard against the ones who mean to help. She pulled her cloak tighter. We stopped going to the lectures. It's told us everything it can, and it's costing us too much to sit through. From now on we assume he watches every hour we're apart, and we make sure there aren't many. The attack came on a Hogsmeade Saturday, in the plain grey light of an ordinary afternoon, which is how the worst things generally come. The village had been declared safe, which is to say the ministry had posted 2 Aurors at the top of the high street and declared the rest of it the school's problem, and the 7th years had been let out on the understanding that they went in groups and came back before dark. Harry and Hermione and Ron had gone together, and it had been, for 2 hours, exactly the ordinary afternoon it pretended to be. Butter beer at the 3 Broomsticks, and Ron losing an argument with the sweet shop over the ethics of a discount, and the 3 of them wandering the lanes with their collars up against a wind that had finally remembered it was October. Then Ron went into Zonko's, and Harry and Hermione walked on a little way to the end of the street where the shops gave out and the road ran on toward the hills, and that was the mistake, the small, ordinary mistake of 2 people wanting a minute alone, and it was all the opening the afternoon needed. Harry felt it before he saw it. That was the thread's first gift, and it saved their lives. A wrongness came down the road ahead of any sound, a coldness that was not the wind, and along the bond he felt Hermione feel it in the same instant, the 2 of them stopping mid-step in the same half-second, wands already moving. And so when the 3 figures unfolded out of the air at the road's end where a moment before there had been nothing, the 2 of them were not surprised, and being unsurprised was the whole of the margin they had. There was no negotiation. Snatchers did not negotiate, and these were worse than snatchers. The first curse came before the last of them had fully formed out of the apparition, a bolt of sick green light that Harry did not so much dodge as get pulled clear of, Hermione's hand closing on his sleeve and hauling him a foot sideways down the thread's own warning, so that the killing curse went past his ear close enough to lift his hair and burst the window of the empty cottage behind them. Then the lane was full of light and noise, and they were fighting for their lives at the edge of a village on an ordinary Saturday, 2 17-year-olds against 3 grown killers who had come for exactly them. For the first 10 seconds they held by instinct and drill. Harry threw a shield wide enough to cover them both, and Hermione fought from behind it, and she fought like something out of the Chronicles, cold and fast and merciless with theory, ripping the cobbles up out of the road with a wrench of her wand, and flinging them in a spinning wall at the nearest attacker so that he had to break his own casting to shield, buying Harry the half-second to answer. A stunner, a leg lock, a jet of hard white light that clipped the second killer's wand arm and spun him half around. Harry moved as he had learned to move in 100 worse rooms than this, low and economical, giving no target, and for those 10 seconds the thread ran clean and open between them, and they were better than 3 grown killers had any right to expect, each covering the other's blind side without a word, each knowing where the other would be. But 3 is a great many wands, and the lane was narrow, and the killers were patient, and they began with the ugly competence of long practice to work around the flanks of Harry's shield toward the one arrangement that would end it, getting the 2 of them separated, driving a wedge of curses between them so that neither could reach the other, because they had been told, whoever had sent them, exactly what these 2 were worth apart and what they were worth together. They should have lost. 3 to 2, and the 3 were older and crueler and better, and in the first 10 seconds Hermione took a slicing hex across the shoulder that turned her left arm useless and painted her sleeve red, and Harry felt it. That was the thread's second lesson, and it nearly finished them both. Her wound arrived in him down the bond in the same instant it opened in her. A line of white fire laid across his own shoulder, though nothing had touched it, and for a heartbeat the shared pain blinded him and his own shield dropped, and a curse caught him in the ribs and put him down on one knee in the mud. And then, kneeling in the mud with his side on fire and her pain and his pain running together down the thread so that he could no longer tell whose was whose, Harry stopped trying to hold his half of the fight alone. He reached for her, not with his hand. Down the thread into the open place they had found in the great hall and practiced on the shore, and she was there, she was always there, and she reached back out of her own pain and her own falling and caught him, and the bond went open between them the way it had gone open over the field of silver dust, all the way, no reserve, and the 2 of them stopped being 2 people losing a fight and became the third thing. The killers felt it change. The nearest one, wand raised for the stroke that would have ended Hermione where she knelt, hesitated at the light that had begun to pour up out of the mud between his 2 victims, gold and rising, and the hesitation was the last decision he ever regretted. Harry and Hermione stood together out of the mud, her ruined arm around his waist and his around her shoulders, holding each other up because neither could stand alone, and raised their wands as one and did not speak, and the braided cord of gold that had unmade a straw man in a practice hall went down the lane and met the three who had come to kill them. It did not kill them back. That was the strange mercy of the thing they had become, and neither of them ever fully understood it. The woven flame did not burn, it unmade. It went over the three killers like a tide going over sandcastles and took the malice out of them, the curses dying half-spoken on their lips, the wands falling from hands that had forgotten why they were raised, the three of them sitting down abruptly in the road as if a string had been cut, blinking, emptied, harmless. When the Aurors came pounding down the high street a minute later, drawn by the noise, they found three of the most wanted killers in Britain sitting quietly in the mud with the expressions of men who had woken from a long sleep and could not remember their own names, and two seventh-year students holding each other upright at the road's end, bleeding, alive, and lit faintly, both of them, with a gold that took the Aurors an hour to convince themselves they had imagined. Ron reached them before the Aurors did. He came out of Zonko's at a dead run with his own wand up and his face white under the freckles, having felt the whole village go wrong the way everyone in it had, and he skidded to a stop at the sight of the three killers sitting vacant in the road and his two best friends holding each other up in a fading gold light, and for a moment he could not make any of it fit. Then he got his shoulder under Harry's other arm without being asked and took some of the weight and said, in a voice pitched carefully level for their sake, "Right, all right, I've got you, both of you. Lean on me and don't you dare tell me what that light was until we're somewhere with a door." He walked them back up the high street between the staring shop fronts, one under each arm, steady as a wall, and if his hands shook he did not let it reach his voice, and neither of them ever forgot that he had come running toward the green light instead of away from it, which was the whole of Ron and always had been. They mended the arm and the ribs in the hospital wing, Madame Pomfrey clucking over wounds that had already begun to close faster than they should, and neither Harry nor Hermione explained why, and she had been at the school long enough not to ask. Dumbledore came and McGonagall and the two Aurors stood white-faced by the door and gave a report that made no sense to them and perfect sense to the headmaster, and when at last the room had emptied of everyone but the four of them, Dumbledore sat down between the two beds and folded his hands and did not pretend for once to be gentle. "Those three did not find you by chance," he said. "They were waiting at the one point on the one road where two students might wander off alone. They knew you would be in the village, they knew near enough when. Somebody told them and somebody told them recently, and I am afraid the list of people who could have is very short." He looked from one of them to the other. "I have kept your secret to a circle I would trust with my life, and yet the circle has a leak in it, or the secret has legs of its own because those three came for a bonded pair and there is only one bonded pair in the world, and here you both lie." He rose. "You held. That is the whole of the good news, and it is not small. Three of Voldemort's own could not break what the two of you made in the mud of a village lane, and they will report that, and it will be believed, and it will change how he comes at you next. He will not send three again. Rest, heal. And do not, either of you, go anywhere alone, not to a village, not to a classroom, not down a corridor. The two of you are only unbreakable together. Apart you are two children with matching wounds, and there is a man in this castle, and a worse one beyond it, who have both just learned exactly how much a wound to one of you costs the other." He left, and McGonagall with him, and the hospital wing settled into its evening quiet, the lamps low, the long room empty but for the two of them in their two beds with the aisle between. Ron came back once the corridor had cleared, slipping in past Madame Pomfrey with the ease of a boy who had spent a good part of 6 years learning the visiting hours of this particular room. He sat on the end of Harry's bed with his elbows on his knees and did not say much, which for Ron was its own language. He had worked most of it out on the walk up the high street, the light and the thing the two of them would not name, and he did not ask them to name it now. "I don't need the whole story," he said at last to the floor. "I've watched the two of you all term. I'm not thick, whatever Hermione's face is doing right now." He stood and picked up his cloak and paused at the door. "Just whatever it is, whatever's going on with you two, and don't tell me it's nothing because I saw that road. You've got me, that's all I came back to say. You point me at whoever sent those three and you've got me." He went, ears red, before either of them could answer, and Harry lay a moment in the low lamplight and understood that some kinds of loyalty do not wait to be given the facts, and thought himself the luckier for it. Harry lay and looked at the dark ceiling and felt his ribs knit and felt down the thread, Hermione's shoulder doing the same. The pain of it gone now to a deep warm ache they were somehow sharing out between them so that neither carried the whole. After a while, without a word, he reached his hand out across the aisle. It did not reach her bed. There was 3 feet of cold air between them. She reached hers out too from her own bed, and their fingertips did not touch, and it did not matter because between the two reaching hands unbidden, the thread kindled and drew itself taut across the gap, a line of gold spanning the dark aisle from her bed to his, humming its note too low to hear, and they lay like that, not touching, joined, while the castle slept around them and the war outside gathered itself for whatever it meant to try next. "They know now," Hermione said into the dark at last. Not just that we exist, what we can do. Vane will have heard by breakfast, Voldemort by nightfall. We stopped being a rumor today, Harry. We became a problem they have to solve. Her fingers curled in the empty air at her end of the thread. So we get better, faster than they do. Starting tomorrow, hospital wing or no hospital wing. Because the next thing that comes down that road won't sit down in the mud and blink. A pause and then softer, the steel gone out of it, only the girl left, but we held, three of them, and we held. Whatever they build to come at us with, we hold. Say it. We hold, Harry said, across the dark, down the thread, and the gold line between their two beds brightened at the promise, and held. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Those who covet the ministry sent its letter within a week of the attack at Hogsmeade, and the letter did what letters from the ministry were designed to do that autumn, which was to arrive dressed as help and enter as a hand at the throat. Dumbledore read it aloud to them in his office, because he had decided they were old enough to hear the shape of the trap laid for them, rather than be managed around it. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement, gravely concerned by the incident in Hogsmeade, and mindful of its duty toward the safety of the school's most notable students, had resolved to second to Hogwarts a specialist consultant in threat assessment, a scholar of unusual configurations of magic whose expertise the department considered uniquely suited to the present danger. The consultant was already resident at the school. He would require access in the interest of the students' protection to observe, to interview, and to assess. His name, of course, was Cassian Vane. He has arranged to be given by law exactly what he came here to take by stealth, Dumbledore said, laying the parchment down. Access to the two of you, the right to observe, the right to ask questions and record the answers. He could not find a way past my wards, so he has gone over them, up to the ministry and down again, and now he holds a warrant, and a warrant is a thing even I must be seen to honor for a time. He looked at them across the desk, and he had never seemed older. I can slow it. I can insist that all his observation happen in my presence or McGonagall's. I can make the interviews brief and useless. But I cannot make him leave, not while the ministry that half fears me signs his orders, and I will not lie to you about what that means. The most patient student of your bond in the world now has a legal right to sit in a room and watch it, and all the time he is watching, he is learning. Hermione had gone very still through all of it, and when she spoke her voice had the flat, fast precision she used for a problem, not a grief. Then we give him nothing to learn, we sit in the room. We answer in monosyllables, we keep the thread dead shut the whole time, no matter what it costs, and we let him watch two ordinary tired students who happen to be friends. He can have all the hours he likes if every hour is empty. That will hold for a while, said Dumbledore. It will not hold forever. He is very good, Miss Granger, and you are very tired, and the bond does not always ask your permission to show itself. One flinch. One moment where Mr. Potter is hurt and you cannot keep your face from answering. That is all he needs, and he will sit in that room every day for a term to earn it. He steepled his fingers. So we will play his game and we will lose it slowly, and while we are losing it slowly I will be doing something else, which I will tell you about when it is ready and not before. For now, give him his empty hours, be dull, be children, and whatever you do, do not let him see the shore. They did not ask how Dumbledore knew about the shore. By then they had stopped being surprised by the things he knew. The interviews began the following Monday, in a bare room off the Transfiguration corridor with McGonagall knitting sternly in the corner as chaperone, and they were, as Hermione had promised, monuments of tedium. Vane asked his courteous questions and received the smallest true answers a person could give without lying. He asked Harry about the attack, and Harry described it as 3 men and a lot of luck. He asked Hermione about her reading, and she gave him a book list so long and so dull that he wrote none of it down. He was patient. He was gracious. He thanked them at the end of each hour as though they had given him a gift, and he never once, in 6 sessions, asked either of them a single question about a mark, a thread, a bond, or a dream. And it was the not asking that told Hermione most of all how much he already knew and how content he was to wait. He filled the empty hours instead with talk, and the talk was the trap. He spoke, seemingly at random, of his years in the Department of Mysteries, of the sealed rooms there and the things kept in them, of a chamber he had worked in for 11 years, whose only study was the nature of the tie between 2 souls. He described experiments in the flat, neutral voice of a man reading a shopping list, and every experiment had failed, and he was frank about why. That the tie could not be built in a laboratory, could not be coaxed from even the most willing of volunteers, could not be paid for or persuaded or grown under glass, that it appeared only in the wild, unbidden, between 2 people who had turned toward one another over years for reasons no instrument could measure. We had every resource the ministry could give, he told them on the 4th day, watching Harry's hands and not his face, and we could not make one thread. Do you know what that does to a man, Mr. Potter, to spend 11 years proving that the thing he most wants cannot be manufactured? It teaches him to wait for one to occur, to watch the whole of Britain year on year for the one wild instance. It teaches him patience past anything you would recognize as patience. He had smiled then gently at nothing. I have become very good at watching. It is nearly all I do now. And Harry, keeping his face empty and the thread shut with everything he had, understood that they were not being interviewed. They were being appraised, the way a jeweler appraises a stone he already means to own, turning it in the light not to decide whether he wants it, but to learn exactly where to place the blade. But on the sixth day he made a mistake, or allowed himself a cruelty, or perhaps simply grew tired of the game, and near the end of the hour, with McGonagall's needles clicking in the corner, he set down his quill and looked at Hermione and said, in the same gentle voice he used for everything, "My wife's name was Elinor. I have never told a student that. I tell you because I think you, of anyone here, might understand what it is to be one half of something, and to be made, by circumstances entirely beyond your choosing, into one half of nothing. I would not wish it on you, Miss Granger. I would go to a very great deal of trouble to make sure it never happened to you." He picked the quill up again. "That is all, thank you. The same time on Thursday, I think." Harry felt what went through Hermione then down the thread before her face gave away a flicker, and it was not what the man had hoped to plant. It was the particular cold recognition of a threat delivered as a kindness, and it steadied rather than shook her, because a named danger is easier to fight than a smiling one. She thanked Mr. Vane, she gathered her things, and in the corridor outside, out of McGonagall's hearing, she said, very low, "He just told us he'd kill for it. He wrapped it in his dead wife and handed it over like a condolence, but that's what that was. He would rather we were dead than left unstudied if it came to it, because a dead pair he could at least dissect. We are running out of the kind of time you can afford to be dull in, Harry." They walked a while without speaking, past the tall windows in the gray October grounds, and Harry felt the whole of it working in her along the thread, the fast, cold sorting of a mind that met a threat by mapping it. "The thing that gets me," she said at last, "is that I understand him. That's the part I can't stand. If someone took you and I spent 30 years unable to bear it, I don't know that I'd end up so very far from where he is. I'd like to think I would, but I've read enough grief to know it doesn't always make people kinder. Sometimes it just makes them thorough." She stopped at a window and looked out at nothing. "So I'm not going to pretend he's a monster, because pretending would make me careless, and he is the single least careless person I have ever met. I'm going to treat him as exactly what he is, the most dangerous kind of good man, the kind who has decided that his pain entitles him to yours. And the only way to beat a man like that isn't to out-argue him. It's to become a thing his grief can't take apart. Which brings us back," she said, turning from the window to the north and a stare and an old woman who's been waiting 100 years. "I want to be gone, Harry. I've never in my life wanted to run from a problem. I want to run from this one straight at the only thing that fixes it." The vision came for Harry 3 nights later, and it came the old way, through the scar which had been quiet so long he had let himself half forget it could still be a door. He was on the shore when it took him. That was the worst of it, that it reached him even there. He had walked into the commons out of a shallow sleep, and Hermione was already waiting on the strand, and they had barely spoken before the pale sand under his feet went wrong, darkened, cracked, and a cold that the shore had never known came pouring in over the tideless sea. And Harry felt himself pulled up out of the country made of the two of them and flung down somewhere else, somewhere real, a high cold room in a house he did not know, and he was looking out through eyes that were not his own. The room was full of Death Eaters kneeling, and at the center of it, in a tall chair, sat the thing that had murdered his parents, and it was speaking, and Harry heard it with the borrowed ears of the mind he had been dragged into, and the words went into him like cold water into the lungs. "A bonded pair," Voldemort was saying, and his voice was worse for being quiet. "The last one, they tell me, died 400 years ago, and I did not trouble myself over the legends of them, because a legend is not a wand pointed at my chest. But there is a line, my friends, an old line that certain of the dead were fond of, and I have had 400 years and more to think on which prophecies to fear and which to laugh at, and this is not one I laugh at." He turned his head, and Harry, trapped behind the eyes he was seeing through, felt the room's dread. "When two are woven into one flame, the deathless shall find their ending. I have made myself deathless at a cost you cannot imagine and would not pay. I did not do it to be undone by a schoolboy and his little friend holding hands. So, it has grown, this flame, where it has not grown in 4 centuries, and it has grown of all the insolent places in my own back garden, in that man's school, in the 2 children I have spent 7 years failing to be rid of." A long silence. "I want them severed. Not killed at first if it can be helped, because a great many of you would only botch the killing and leave me 2 martyrs and a legend given legs. Severed, their thread cut, their power broken back into 2 ordinary frightened children, and then at my leisure killed. There's a man already inside the school who has spent his life learning the cutting of exactly this bond. He does not serve me, he does not need to. He wants what I want for reasons of his own, and a tool that sharpens itself out of its own grief is the finest tool there is. Let him work, watch him, and when he has done the thing I cannot spare the years to learn, take it from him." The pale face turned again, and the red eyes seemed to look, impossibly, straight down the length of the borrowed sight, straight at Harry, as if it knew. "And if the cutting fails, if the flame proves as stubborn as the old fools swore it would, then we do it the simple way. We take the one, and we make very sure the other is watching." Harry came out of it screaming, back on the shore, and the shore was black to its horizon, the sea heaving, the shell sky gone the color of a bruise, and Hermione had both hands on his face and was saying his name, and along the thread she had felt all of it, every word, because on the shore there was no keeping anything from her. The vision had come through him and into her, and they had watched their own murder plan together, from inside the mouth that planned it. They did not sleep again that night. They stayed on the shore until they had made it gold again by main force, the two of them, and then they woke in their separate towers and met before dawn in the cold common room, and Hermione had a quill and parchment and was already writing, because writing was how she kept the walls of herself standing. "He's going to use Vane and then discard him," she said, her hand moving. "That's the arrangement. Vane cuts, Voldemort collects. Vane doesn't know he's a tool, or he knows and thinks he's the one using them. Grief makes people stupid that way. And if the cutting fails," her quill stopped, "if it fails, they take one of us and torture the other with it down the bond until the pain breaks the weave from the inside. That's the simple way, that's what he said." She looked up and the dawn was gray on her face, and she was not, in that moment, a schoolgirl at all. "We have to be gone before either plan is ready. Both of them need us here together, reachable. Every day we stay in this castle is a day we hand them." Harry sat down beside her on the cold hearthstone and watched her hand move across the parchment and did not answer at once, because the thing sitting in him was too large to put into a plan. He had seen the inside of that room. He had heard his own murder discussed by the mouth that had orphaned him, in the tone another man might use to arrange the pruning of a difficult hedge, and worst of all, he had understood from the inside of that cold mind exactly how little he and Hermione were to it. Not enemies, not even really people, only a problem in the arithmetic of an immortality it had paid too much for to see threatened now. "He's not angry at us," Harry said slowly. "That's the part I can't get out. When people hate you, you matter to them. He doesn't hate us, Hermione. We're a leak in the roof. He wants us fixed the way you want a leak fixed and then forgotten." He looked at the graying window. "I think that's why we win if we win, because to us this is everything, and to him it's a chore he's delegated. He gave us to a man with a warrant and a grudge because he couldn't be bothered to come himself. That's arrogance, and I've watched arrogance lose to two people who cared more than once." "Then we make him come himself," Hermione said, not looking up, her quill still moving. "Eventually, when we're the finished thing and not the frayed one. We make ourselves into a leak he can't delegate, and then we're on our own ground, because there is no one in the world who cares more than the two of us, and caring, it turns out, is the one resource he never learned to counterfeit." She underlined a word twice, hard enough to tear the parchment. "But that's the far end of it. The near end is a road at moonrise. First we survive the near end. The strike came before Dumbledore's plan was ready, because the enemy did not wait on anyone's convenience, and it came at the school itself. It was the dead middle of a Tuesday night when the wards screamed." Harry was half awake already, the shore too troubled for real sleep, and he felt the castle's alarm as a physical thing. A great bronze note rung through the stone, and under it, sharper along the thread, he felt Hermione come awake 3 towers away with the same knowledge he had. They were inside. The wards that had held Hogwarts for 1,000 years had been opened from within, by a warrant holder with legitimate access and a key he should never have been given, and now the dark was coming up the stairwells. What followed was not a battle so much as a hunt conducted in the dark, and Harry moved through it the only way that mattered, which was toward her. He came out of Gryffindor Tower into corridors lit red by the alarm, past older students herding younger ones toward the safe rooms, past a suit of armor fighting a hooded figure with grim mechanical patience, and every step of it he steered by the thread, by the bright fixed point of her that pulled him on through smoke and spellfire, because the one thing the enemy wanted was to get between them, and the one thing he would die before allowing was exactly that. The way to her was not clear. A hooded figure stepped out of a doorway on the 4th floor, and Harry did not slow, only threw a stunner low and hard as he passed and felt it connect, felt the body fold behind him, and did not look back, because looking back was time, and time was the space between him and Hermione. A curse took a chunk out of the wall by his head and showered him with stone. He came around a corner into 2 more of them and did not try to fight them properly, only threw up a shield in a great blinding flare of light and went through the gap while they were still blinking, ducking under a wand, taking a graze across the arm that he barely felt, running on the thread now more than on his eyes, because the thread did not lie and did not tire and did not lose its way in smoke, and it ran straight and bright and true toward the fixed point that was her. They had planned for this in their fashion. They had agreed a place, a landing on the moving stairs where the sightlines were long and the ground was good, and they reached it within seconds of each other, out of 2 different stairwells, and the instant they were in reach the thread snapped open between them and the corridor filled with the particular warmth that meant they had stopped being 2 targets and become the third thing. And for a while, at the top of those stairs, they were magnificent. Hooded figures came up at them out of the smoke and were unmade, disarmed, flung back down the shifting stairs. Hermione turned a whole flight of the moving staircase sideways under a knot of attackers and spilled them shrieking into the well below, and Harry braided a wall of gold across the landing that threw back every curse that struck it and sent the light of it rebounding down on the hunt like a breaking wave. Together they held the high ground and made the enemy pay in wands and worse for every stair they tried to climb, the two of them moving as one animal with 4 hands, and the braided light went out from them in cords and sheets and drove the hunt back and back, and Harry let himself think for one dangerous minute that they might simply win. Then Vane arrived, and Vane did not come up the stairs. He came from above, from a gallery that overlooked the landing, and he did not throw a curse because he had not come to duel. He had come to do the one thing his whole life had prepared him for, and he did it with a single, precise motion of his wand and one word Harry did not know, and it was aimed not at either of them but at the thread itself, at the bright braided cord of light running open between them, and where his working touched it the light did not break, but it screamed. Both of them went down. It was the echo wound made a weapon, the sundering begun in earnest, and it did not feel like a curse hitting a body. It felt like a hand closing on the root of the self, on the place where Harry ended and Hermione began, and beginning, with terrible patience, to pull the two apart. Harry heard Hermione cry out and heard himself cry out in the same breath, the two sounds one sound, and the warmth that had filled the corridor guttered toward cold, and for one endless instant the thread thinned toward parting, and Harry felt what the chronicles had meant, felt the beginning of the death of them both. And then Dumbledore was there. He came onto the landing like weather, and he did not argue with Vane and did not threaten him. He simply put himself bodily between the scholar's wand and the failing thread and broke the working with a counter that shook dust from the ceiling, and the pressure on the root of Harry's self let go all at once, and the thread sprang back gold and whole, and both of them collapsed gasping onto the stone, whole, joined, alive. Above them Vane and Dumbledore stood a moment measuring one another across the smoke, the old wizard and the grief-made cutter, and it was Vane who lowered his wand first, unhurried, almost regretful. "You cannot guard them every hour, Albus," he said over the noise of the rooted hunt below. "You are one man and old, and there is only one of you. I am patient, and I am not the only one who wants this, and the other one who wants it is far less careful of them than I am. Consider that. I would keep them whole, he would not." And he stepped back into the dark of the gallery and was gone, and the Death Eaters broke and fled before McGonagall's answer came roaring up the stairs, and the strike was over, and the castle had held but only just, and everyone in it who understood anything understood that only just was not a thing that held twice. Harry got himself up off the stone first and reached down for Hermione, and she took his hand and came up shaking, and they held onto each other on the wrecked landing, while the alarm note died away into the ordinary sounds of a school counting its wounded. Neither of them spoke of what Vane's working had felt like. There were no words yet for the sensation of the root of yourself being pulled from the root of the person you loved, and they both knew there might never be, and that trying to describe it would only make it real again. But along the thread in the afterquiet each of them found the other and held tight, checking, the way you press a bruise to be sure the bone beneath is whole, and the thread answered gold and unbroken, and that was the only reassurance either of them would trust. Vane had gotten his wand onto the bond itself and begun the cutting in the open in the middle of a school, and only an old man's body thrown across the gap had stopped it. He would not need the gap next time. He would only need them apart in a locked door in a little time, and he had told them so himself kindly before he walked away. "Elder Hollow," Hermione said into Harry's shoulder, not a question. "Now. Whatever Dumbledore's road is, we take it now tonight before Pomfrey's even finished counting." "Tomorrow at moonrise," Harry said. He was clear, the road only opens then. He tightened his arm around her. "One more day, we hold one more day." Dumbledore came to them the next night in the hospital wing where Pomfrey had insisted on keeping them though their bodies bore no marks, because the wound Vane had dealt was not the kind a body wears. He drew the curtains around the two beds and sat between them and told them at last what his other plan had been. "There is a place," he said, "very old, older than Hogwarts, older than the Ministry, older than the statute and the wars and every institution that has since tried to forget it. The old texts, when they mention it at all, call it by a dozen names, but the truest is the plainest, the hollow of the first thread. It is where the first bond was woven, if the oldest stories are to be believed, and it is the one place on this earth where the magic that lives in the two of you does not merely exist but is at home. I have known of it my whole long life and never had cause to go, because in my whole long life there has been no living bond to bring there." He looked from one of them to the other. "There is now, and I believe, though I cannot promise, that what Vane began on the stairs cannot be finished there. That the hollow will not permit the sundering within its bounds. That if you go there and learn what the place has to teach, you will come back not the fragile new thing you are now, easily frayed, but the whole and finished weaving the chronicles feared, which no cutter's art has ever broken. I believe the hollow is where you become what the prophecy actually means." "How do we find a place older than every map?" Hermione asked, and it was the right question, the practical one, and Dumbledore inclined his head at it. "You do not find it, it is not found, it is come to, and only by the right feet. I can set you on the road and no further. There's a glen in the far north, in country the maps leave gray, and at the head of the glen there is a ring of standing stones. The shepherds give a wide berth and cannot say why. Between the stones there is a way down that is not always there. It opens to the bond and to nothing else. That is its whole defense, and it has never in an age failed. Two ordinary travelers could camp in that ring 100 nights and see only stones. The two of you will walk between them and find a stair. He drew a folded square of cloth from his robes and pressed it into Hermione's hands, and it was warm, faintly, with the warmth they both knew. And there is a keeper. There has always been a keeper, one at a time, down the long ages, each one older than seems possible, each one having given up an ordinary life to tend the place against the day a bond should come to it. The one there now is called Merwin. She has waited, if the little I know is true, the better part of a century for a pair to come down her stair, and she will not, I think, be gentle, because a woman who has waited a century for you has earned the right to be exacting. Do as she says. Even when it frightens you, especially then. He closed her hands over the cloth. This will guide your feet to the glen. After the glen, only the bond guides you, and only the two of you together. Apart, the north will swallow you, and no one will ever know. That is the last reason you go together, in case you needed one more. Then we go, Harry said. Then you go, Dumbledore agreed. Tomorrow night, quietly, by a road I will make for you. I cannot come. I dare not leave the school undefended with Vane inside it and worse outside, and in truth this is not a journey an old man can make for you or with you. The hollow answers to the bond, and I have no bond to offer it. You will go alone, the two of you, which is the whole point, because the two of you are the only credential the place accepts. He rose, and at the curtain he paused, and his voice gentled. I will not pretend it is safe. Nothing is now. But I would rather send you toward the one thing that can finish you into something unbreakable than keep you here to be frayed apart an inch at a time by a patient man with a warrant. Sleep, you leave at moonrise. And Harry, Hermione, he looked back at them, and for once there was no plan in his face, only an old man who had sent a great many children toward danger and never learned to like it, hold to each other on the road. Whatever comes, the road will test it. Let it find you already holding. They told Ron the whole of it the next morning, in the empty seventh-year dormitory with the door locked and Hermione's best silencing charm on the walls, because they were about to vanish from the school in the dead of night, and he deserved better than to wake and find them gone. Hermione did the telling in order, plainly, the marks and the thread and the shore and the chronicles and Vane and the vision and the road, and Ron sat on his own bed and listened to all of it without once interrupting, which was itself a thing none of them had thought him capable of, and when she had finished he was quiet a while. Right, he said at last. So, soulmates. Actual, magical, ancient soulmates, and a bloke who wants to cut you apart with a warrant, and you know who wants you dead special, more than the rest of us, and now you're off to some magic hollow in the middle of nowhere to get so married the magic can't undo it. He blew out a breath. And here's me thinking the two of you had just finally sorted yourselves out, which by the way took long enough. The whole Towers had money on it since 5th year. He tried for the joke and did not quite make it land, because his eyes had gone bright and he looked down at his hands. You should have told me sooner, not because I'd have been any use with the reading, because I'd have been less scared knowing. I've been watching you two carry something heavy all term and thinking you didn't trust me with it. We didn't tell you because Vane could have taken it out of you, Hermione said gently. Not because we didn't trust you, because we did. It was the one way we could protect you, keeping you clean of it. You can't leak what you don't hold. She crossed the room and sat beside him. But we're telling you now because we need something from you that no one else can do. We need you here. Someone has to be the reason nobody comes looking for us for 3 days. Cover the gaps, answer for us at meals. Tell whoever asks that we're ill or serving detention or anything. And if it goes wrong, if we don't come back, don't, said Ron. If we don't come back, she went on, because she always finished the sentence, then you're the only one outside Dumbledore who knows the whole shape of it, and someone who knows the whole shape has to be left standing. That's the job. It isn't a small one. It's the biggest one, actually, because it's the one that lets us go without spending the whole road looking over our shoulders at the school. Ron looked at the two of them a long moment, and whatever had gone bright in his eyes he blinked back, because there would be time for that later, and this was not it. Course, he said roughly. Course I'll cover you. I'll tell McGonagall you've both got dragon pox. That'll clear a room. He stood and stuck out his hand, and Harry took it, and Ron pulled him into the rough, one-armed embrace of boys who have not got the words, and thumped his back once hard. Come back, he said into Harry's shoulder, low enough that it was almost not out loud at all. Both of you, don't make me be the one who knew the whole shape of it. I'd be rubbish at it. Come back. They spent their last hour before the leaving on the shore, because it was the one place left where no one could reach them, and because there were things to say that could not be said above the water. The shore had healed. They had spent 3 nights mending it after the vision, and now it lay gold and gentle again under the shell sky, the sea come back to its soundless calm, and they walked the strand together in the strange found time of the place, unhurried, though above the water a castle waited, and a road waited, and a great deal waited that neither of them could name. I need to tell you the thing I'm not supposed to say, Hermione said at last, stopping at the edge of the bright water. The thing where I'm meant to be brave and certain because that's my job, being the one who's read ahead. She turned to face him. I'm frightened, Harry. There, that's the word. I'm only going to use it once. Not of the road or Vane or even of him. I'm frightened of the part where the chronicles all agree that the way you break a bond is to take one and hurt them in front of the other. Because I have run the sums, I always run the sums, and the sum is this: if it ever comes to that, if they ever have one of us and are hurting them to break the other, then the loving thing, the strategic thing, the thing that saves the most of what matters, is for the free one to let the bond go, to let it break clean rather than be torn slow. And I know myself, Harry, I will not be able to do it. I will not be able to let you go, not to save myself, not to save anyone, not to win the whole war. I will hold that thread past the point where holding it kills us both, and that is not bravery. That is the one place where I am not principled and not brilliant and not your equal in judgment. That is just love being stronger than sense, and I needed you to know it's there, this flaw, this exact flaw, before we walk into a place that might make the bond too strong to ever let go of again. Harry took a while to answer. The sea lay still, and when he spoke he did not argue with her sums because she was better at sums than he would ever be, and she would have known the comfort for a lie. Then it's not a flaw, he said, or it's the same flaw in both of us, which makes it just the shape of the thing, not a crack in it. Because I ran the same sum a long time ago, Hermione, back before there was a thread, back when it was just me not being able to imagine a version of my life where I let something happen to you to save myself. I already know I can't let go. I've known for years, so we don't build a plan on one of us being wise enough to let go because neither of us is, and pretending otherwise is how people die surprised. He took both her hands. We build the plan on not getting caught. On being unbreakable together, which is the whole reason we're walking into that hollow. We make ourselves into the thing they can't take one half of, and then the terrible sum never comes up because there's never a free one and a caught one. There's just us, always us. That's the plan. That's the only plan I'll agree to. Hermione was quiet a moment, looking out over the still gold water toward the horizon where the thread ran out and met the sky. You know what the old keeper's going to try to teach us, she said. I worked it out from the chronicles on the walk down here. The reason the hollow can finish the bond is that it teaches you to stop holding it as two people each gripping their own end. It teaches you to let it be one thing. And the price of that, Harry, the thing none of the chronicles say out loud but all of them circle, is that afterward there's no more each, no more your end and my end. One thread held from the middle by something that used to be two and isn't quite anymore either. She turned to look at him. That should frighten me more than it does. I've spent my whole life being exactly, defensibly one person, right too often, alone too much but mine, and I'm about to walk down a stair and let a 100-year-old woman teach me to stop being only that. And the strange thing, the thing I can't explain even to you, is that when I imagine it, I don't feel like I'm losing myself. I feel like I'm finally going to be the whole of what I already am and have been pretending, for tidiness was just me. She took a breath. Is that mad? Tell me if that's mad. You're the only one left who could tell me and have it mean anything. It's not mad, Harry said. It's the least mad thing you've ever said, and you've said some sensible things. Brushed a strand of hair off her face, and the sea brightened at the touch of it, answering her and not him, or answering the two of them, there being less and less difference. I stopped being only one person the night the thread first ran between us in the common room, and I've been happier since then in the whole rest of my life put together. So if the hollow's just going to finish a thing that already started, let it. I'm not frightened of being less alone, Hermione. I've had the other thing. It's overrated. She came into his arms then, on the shore under the shell sky, and they stood a while in the tideless quiet of the one country that was theirs, and did not say anything more because it had all been said. Above the water in the world, the moon was climbing toward the notch in the eastern hills that Dumbledore had named, and a road was waiting to be walked, and a place older than everything was waiting at the end of it to make them either whole forever or a thing too bound ever to survive its own breaking. But on the shore for one more hour there was only the two of them holding, as they had promised the old man they would, already holding when the road came to find them. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The deep magic Dumbledore's cloth took them north the way a compass takes a hand, not by force but by a steady insistence, warming toward the correct direction and cooling toward the wrong, and they followed it out of the moonrise and into the wild country where the maps gave up. It set them down by whatever old craft was woven into it, on a shoulder of open moor under a sky enormous with cold stars, and the castle and the war and Cash in Vain were suddenly very far away. There was no road. There was heather black in the starlight and the sound of water running somewhere unseen, and a wind that came off the top of the world carrying nothing that had been made by any human hand, and the two of them stood in the middle of it with their cloaks snapping and the cloth pointing on, up the long dark rise of the moor toward a notch in the hills where the stars were thickest. They walked for hours. It should have exhausted them, the cold and the climb and the days behind them, and it did not, because the closer they came to the notch the more the thread woke, the coal behind each of their ribs banking brighter with every mile, so that they walked warmer than the night had any right to leave them, warmed from the inside, warmed by each other. Hermione's hand found Harry's in the dark, and they went on hand in hand across the roof of Scotland, two small warm figures on an enormous cold moor, following a thread they carried and a cloth that pointed to the place their thread had come from. The country grew older as they climbed. That was the only word for it, though neither of them said it aloud. The land itself seemed to shed the centuries the higher they went, the walls and the sheep tracks and the last far pinprick of a crofter's lamp falling away below and behind, until there was nothing around them that had been touched by any hand in 1,000 years, only rock and heather and black water and the enormous wheeling sky. The stars up here were not the tame stars of a castle window. They stood out hard and close and uncountable, a great cold spill of them from horizon to horizon, and the longer Harry walked under them, the more he had the sense of walking not across a country but across the floor of something vaster, some old cathedral with the roof taken off, in which the two of them were the only warm and living things and were watched, not unkindly, by everything that was not. Once Hermione stopped and simply stood, her face turned up, her hand still in his, and said nothing at all, and he stood with her, and let the enormity have them both a moment, and felt along the thread that she was thinking the same wordless thing he was, that a person could be very small under a sky like this and be perfectly steady in it, so long as the one warm hand in the dark was the right one. They saw the stones an hour before dawn. They stood at the head of the glen the cloth had promised, a ring of them, tall and rough and grey, older than the idea of Britain, leaning at the angles that 10,000 winters give, and there were 12 of them, and they made a circle wide enough to hold a house, and inside the circle there was nothing at all but cropped grass silver with frost and the smell of very old stone. The shepherds had been right to give it a wide berth. Something lived in the ring, or waited in it, a stillness that was not empty but attending, the particular quality of a room where someone is holding very quiet on the other side of a door, and both of them felt at the moment they crossed the boundary of the stones, and both of them stopped. "There's nothing here," Harry said, though he did not believe it. "There's nothing here for two people," said Hermione, and her voice had gone hushed. Dumbledore said, "Two ordinary travelers could camp 100 nights and see only stones. It opens to the bond." She turned to him in the gray pre-dawn, and the frost was on her hair, and she held out her hand. "So let's not be two people, let's be the thing it's waiting for." They stood in the center of the ring and clasped hands and let the thread run open, all the way, no reserve, the way they had learned in the hall and on the shore and in the mud of a village lane, and the coal blazed up in each of them and met in the middle, and the gold thread kindled between their two hands and did not stop kindling. It grew brighter than it had ever grown. It ran up their arms and lit the two of them from within, so that they stood in the ring of ancient stones as two lamps lit off a single flame, and the light of them fell outward on the 12 leaning stones, and the stones answered. They had waited a very long time to answer. One by one, sunwise around the ring, the great gray stones woke, a seam of gold opening down the length of each one, as though the light inside the two travelers had reminded the stone of a light it had once held itself. And the 12 seams of gold burned in the dark and then reached, each stone to the next, a thread of light leaping the gaps between them until the whole ring was strung with fire, a crown of gold laid on the head of the glen. And in the center of the ring, where a moment before there had been only frost-silver grass, the ground itself opened, not violently, not with any breaking, but the way a hand opens, unfolding downward into a stair of pale stone that had not been there and now had always been there, spiraling down and down out of the frozen moor into a warmth that came up to meet them, smelling of green things and old incense and the sea. The stair to the hollow of the first thread had opened to the bond, as it had opened to no one in 100 years, and Harry and Hermione stood at the top of it hand in hand, lit like lamps, and looked down into the gold, and then they went down together, because there had never, from the first gray shore, been any other direction for the two of them to go. The hollow was not a cave, though the earth was over it. It was a country the way the shore was a country, but where the shore was made of the two of them, this had been made by hands long ago out of devotion and stone. They came off the last of the stair into a vast round chamber roofed with a dome so high the gold light lost itself before it reached the top, and the dome was not blank but worked, every foot of it, with a carving that ran unbroken around and up and over, and the carving was of two threads. Two lines of stone, one deeper cut and one shallower, that ran side by side out of the floor at the chamber's edge and climbed the wall and crossed the dome, and everywhere they went they wove, over and under and around one another, sometimes far apart and sometimes so close they seemed a single line. And where they crossed at the very crown of the dome, the stone had been set with something that caught the gold light and threw it back as warmth. So that the whole vast roof of the place was a single endless image of two lives braiding through 1,000 years of ceiling. At the center of the floor, directly under the crown, there was a pool, round and still and dark, and it did not reflect the dome. It reflected, when Harry looked into it, the shore, the shell sky, the tideless sea, their country, held in a pool of black water under a mountain, waiting. He walked the edge of the great chamber while his eyes learned it, and everywhere he went the carving of the two threads went with him, up out of the floor at his shoulder and away over his head, and he began to see that it was not decoration but record. Here, low on the wall where a child might have traced it, the two lines ran wide apart with a whole field of blank stone between, and he understood without being told that this was a beginning, two lives that did not yet know of one another. Higher the lines bent toward each other across the years of the wall. Higher still they touched and parted and touched again, the old carver's chisel marking every nearness and every falling away, and it was, Harry realized, the shape of any two people who had ever loved slowly and against the odds. It was, near enough, the shape of the last 6 years of his own life, cut into stone 1,000 years before he was born by someone who had known exactly how such a thing goes. And at the crown of the dome, where the two lines finally wove into one and stayed woven, the stone had been set with the light-catching substance that warmed the whole room, so that the very top of the hollow, the place all the long climbing threads were climbing toward, glowed like a low steady star held under the earth. The message of the place needed no keeper to speak it. It was written in the walls for anyone with the eyes. This is where it goes if you let it, all the way up. All the way to the one warm star at the top of the dark. They knew us before we were born, Hermione said softly at his shoulder, reading the same walls. Not us, but the shape of us. Somebody stood exactly here an age ago, having done what we're about to do and loved us enough to leave the map. Oh, Hermione breathed, turning under the woven dome with her head back and the gold on her face, and it was the only word either of them had, and it was enough. They took their time over it, said a voice, which is the least a thing like this deserves. She was sitting on a stone bench against the curve of the wall, and she had been sitting there, Harry understood, the whole time, so still they had taken her for part of the carving. She was very old. Old past the reckoning of ordinary years, her face a country of lines, her hair white and unbound to her waist, her eyes the pale clear gray of deep ice, and she rose from the bench with a slowness that had nothing of frailty in it, only the deliberateness of someone who has learned that there is always time, and no reason left in the world to hurry. Merwin, Hermione said, keeper of the first thread. The 43rd of that name, or the 44th, I have lost the count and it does not matter. We are all of us only the one keeper, wearing out one body after another while we wait. The old woman came toward them across the gold floor, and her ice-gray eyes went from Harry to Hermione and back, and something moved in them that had been held ready for 100 years. And I have waited. Do you know what it is, children, to give up your whole life to tend a room against the arrival of two people who may not come in your lifetime, or your successors or their successors? I came here a young woman. I have not seen the sun in no. I will not say it aloud. It would frighten you, and there is no need. She stopped before them, and she looked at the light still burning faintly off the two of them, the light that had opened her stare, and her lined face did something slow and enormous. But you came. In my keeping you came. After all of it you came. Let me look at you. Let me look at the thing I have spent a life waiting to see. She looked at them a long moment, and neither of them moved under it, and when she spoke again her voice had firmed back into the exacting instrument Dumbledore had warned them of. You are not finished, she said. You know that, or you would not have come. You are woven but loosely, a new thing, and a new thing can be frayed, and I gather from the state of you that someone has already tried. Her eyes went to a place on Harry's chest, over the mark, seeing through the cloth, it seemed, to the 2 bright stars and the 10 faint ones waiting around them. The hollow can finish what you have begun. That is what it is for. That is the only thing it is for, and it has done it exactly twice in all the ages, and both times the pair went out from here into legend. But understand me before I teach you anything. She looked between them hard. I can show you the finishing. I cannot make you do it, nor should I be able to. The whole nature of the thing forbids it. The hollow finishes only what is freely and fully given. So before I say another word, I will ask you the only question that matters, and you will answer it truly, or you will climb my stair and go home unfinished, and I will die still waiting, and that is an acceptable outcome. Children, do not think you would be doing me a wrong. The question is this: do you choose it, not the power, not the safety from the cutter, not the prophecy, nor the war, nor any use the thing could be put to? The thing itself, each other wholly past the last wall either of you keeps. Do you choose it freely both, knowing there is no unchoosing after? The gold light hung in the great woven dome. The pool held the shore, and Harry looked at Hermione, and Hermione looked at Harry, and it was the common room in the dawn again, and the lake, and the shore, and every choosing they had already made leading to this last one, and neither of them looked away. Yes, they said together, without arranging it. One word in one voice under the 1,000-year ceiling, and the pool at the center of the floor brightened at the saying of it, the shore within it running suddenly gold to its horizon, and the old keeper closed her ice-gray eyes and let out a breath that seemed to carry a century of waiting out of her all at once. Then I did not wait in vain, said Merwin. Come, I will teach you the finishing. And then, for pity's sake and your own, I will leave you the hollow to yourselves, because the last of the finishing is not a thing that wants a keeper watching, and I have a stair to guard besides. She taught them at the pool, and the teaching was not spells. There had been an idea in both of them, unspoken, that the finishing would be a rite of words and gestures, a working to be got right, and it was nothing of the kind. Merwin sat them at the edge of the dark pool that held their shore, and she told them in her unhurried, century-worn voice the truth the chronicles had only circled. The bond is not a thread between two people, she said. That is the beginner's picture, and it is not wrong, but it is not finished, and the picture is the thing that must change before the bond can. A thread between two people can be cut because there are two ends, and a thing with two ends can be caught by one of them. What I will teach you is to stop being two people holding a thread and become one thing that happens to look out through two faces. There is no end to catch then, there is no gap to press. The cutter puts his blade where the join is and finds there is no join because there is no longer a seam between you for a blade to find. Her pale eyes moved between them. You have felt the edges of this already on your shore, the place where you cannot tell whose feeling is whose. That place is small in you now, a shore, a strip of sand. The finishing is to let it be everything, to stop defending the last coastline of the self, to give the other not your love, which you have already given, but your very boundary, the wall that makes you and not them, and to receive theirs, and to let the two walls come down together at once freely, so that what stands after is neither of you and both, a single flame that has forgotten it was ever two. And that can't be undone, Hermione said quietly. Once the walls are down, by no hand but your own death's. Merwin did not soften it. That is the price, child, and I will not hide it from you, for you of all people would never forgive a thing hidden. After the finishing there is no more each. If one of you dies, the other does not merely grieve. There is no other to grieve. There is only the one thing torn in half, and a thing torn in half does not go on. You will be, past this night, unbreakable by any living power, immortal in a single new way, which is that you have become, truly and finally, one life. Two bodies, one life, that is the whole of it. The power the world covets is only a side effect of that one fact. The prophecy the deathless fears means only this, that a single life freely made out of two and grown to its full flame is the one thing his kind of death has no answer to, because he made himself deathless by tearing his own soul into pieces and hiding them, and you are about to do the precise and opposite thing, and the universe, children, keeps a very exact set of scales. She was quiet a moment, and when she went on her voice had dropped into the cadence of a thing recited so many times across so many years that it had worn smooth as a stone in a stream. There were two at the beginning, before there were schools or ministries or wands as you would know them. A woman and a man of the old people who turned toward one another over the turning of their lives and did, without knowing there was a name for it or a price on it, the thing you did last night. They were the first. And when a great dark came for the old people, a dark not so unlike your own deathless enemy, hungering, unkillable, feeding on the fear it made, the two of them stood against it, and the dark could not comprehend them, because it was a thing made of division, of self set against self, of the one great loneliness at the root of all cruelty, and they were a thing made of the opposite. And when it tried to take them, it found nothing to take hold of, no seam, no fear, no lonely self to work upon. And it broke itself against them and was gone. Her ice-gray eyes moved between them. That is the first story. That is why there is a keeper and a hollow and a stair that opens only to a bond. Because the old people understood what they had been saved by, and they built this place to remember it, and to shelter the next such flame should it ever come, and to teach it, when it came, what the first two had to learn the hard way in the teeth of the dark. You are not the beginning of something, children. You are the return of something. That flame has been out of the world a long, weary age, and the world has grown colder for the want of it, and now it is lit again in my keeping, and I mean to see it does not go out for the lack of anyone telling it what it is. She let that settle. Now, I have told you the cost. Ask me your questions, and then I will go and let the hollow do the rest, and no one, not you and not I, will ever be able to say I did not make the price plain. They asked their questions, and she answered them plainly, all of them, and there were not in the end as many as either had thought, because the thing itself, once looked at squarely, was simple, and Hermione had never in her life turned back from a true thing merely because it was large. And when the questions were done, Merwin looked at the two of them sitting at the edge of the pool that held their shore, and her ancient exacting face gentled for the first and only time. I waited my whole life for you, she said. I want you to know it was worth it. Whatever comes after, and something always comes after, I have seen a true bond come freely to the finishing, and there is no keeper in 1,000 years who got a better gift than that. She paused at the foot of the stair, and something crossed her ancient face that she did not trouble to hide from them, because they were past the point where anything could be hidden. There will be a temptation after, she said, and I would be a poor keeper not to warn you of it. When you are the finished flame, the whole world will feel thin to you by comparison, and the ones who covet you will offer you reasons to use what you have become, to make yourselves a weapon, to end the war in an afternoon and think the cost worth it. Do not, her ice-gray eyes held them. The flame is not for burning. The first two did not defeat their dark by striking it. They defeated it by being a thing it could not strike. That is the whole secret, and every legend since has got it backward. You will be tempted to become the greatest weapon the world has seen. Refuse, and you will instead be the one thing it cannot lose. There is all the difference between those two, and the difference is the difference between the first pair and your deathless enemy, who was also once offered exactly this choice by an older keeper than I and chose the weapon, and you have seen what he became. She let that land. Now I am going to guard my stair. The hollow is yours till morning. And she climbed the pale stair without looking back, up into the ring of burning stones, and left them alone at the center of the woven world. What passed between them in the hollow that night belonged to them, and the telling of it stops at the edge of the gold light, where such things should stop. But this can be told, that they did not rush it, and the gold light left no room in either of them for anything but the other, and every wall either of them had ever built came down not because a magic pulled it down, but because two people, freely and with their eyes open, chose to set it down, brick by brick, and hand the other what lay behind. They gave each other that night the last held things, the parts no spell could have taken and no torture could have pried loose, offered up willingly across the falling walls, and the hollow received it. The woven dome brightened overhead as they let the coastline of the self go under, the two threads of stone in the ceiling burning brighter where they crossed, and the pool that held their shore rose in a slow tide of gold light that filled the great chamber and washed over the two of them and did not recede. And somewhere in the height of the dome, at the crown where the two carved threads met, the ancient stone rang once, a single note too low to hear and impossible not to feel, the note the thread had always hummed. Sounded now at the top of its voice, the sound of two lives becoming one. The gold rose to fill the dome. It climbed the two carved threads of stone as living light climbs a wick higher and higher up the thousand-year weaving, so that the whole history of the ceiling caught and burned, a millennium of braided stone lit from within, and where the two lines crossed and recrossed on their long climb to the crown the light pooled and blazed, marking every place across the ages that two had come near to one, and the whole vast chamber turned from a carving of the thing into the thing itself. A cathedral of gold with two travelers at the heart of it, and the light did not blind and did not burn. It warmed, only warmed, the particular warmth of the mark and the coal in the thread, grown to fill a room the size of a hill, so that for one held moment the hollow was not underground at all but somewhere very high, somewhere above even the hard close stars of the moor, in the place the light itself came from before ever it learned to run between two hands. And on the shore, in the country made of the two of them, the tide came in. It had never come in before. In all their nights on the strand the sea had lain tideless and still, waiting, and now, as the walls came down in the waking world, the shore answered, and the great gold sea rose and ran up the pale sand and met them where they stood at the water's edge, warm, unhurried, covering their feet and rising, and it was not a drowning, it was a homecoming. It was the water they had each been standing beside their whole lives finally allowed to close over them and hold them up, and they let it together, and the last line between his end of the thread and her end of the thread dissolved in the rising gold like a footprint under the tide, and where two had walked the shore since the first gray dream, there was from that night on only the shore itself and the one warm sea, and the single flame that had forgotten it was ever two. They woke in the hollow in the gold half-light with no way to tell the hour, wrapped in their cloaks on the warm stone by the pool, and the first thing Harry knew before he was fully awake was that he could not find the edge of himself. It was not frightening, that was the strangeness of it. He reached, out of old habit, down the thread toward Hermione, to feel the far warm point of her as he had every morning since term began, and there was no thread and no far point because there was no distance left to cross. She was not at the other end of anything. She was simply here, woven through the whole of him the way the two carved threads wove through the whole of the dome, and when she stirred against his shoulder and woke, he felt her wake from the inside, felt the morning come to her as it came to him, when waking in one life looking out through two faces. She lifted her head and looked at him, and he watched her find the same absence, the same beautiful missing edge, and he watched her decide as he had that it was not a loss. "There you are," she said. It was not quite the right thing to say, because there was no longer a there for either of them to be, but it was the closest words could come, and words did not matter much now anyway between two who no longer entirely needed them. Or, "Here we are." She lay back against him under the woven dome and was quiet a while, and he felt her turn the new fact over, examine it, measure it, and find it at the last good. "It worked," she said. "Harry, it worked. I keep waiting to feel like less. I feel like more, I feel like the whole of a thing I only ever had half of." She laughed low, and he felt the laugh in his own chest before he heard it. "The chronicles were written by people standing outside. I finally understand why not one of them ever got it right. You can't. There's no outside anymore. There's just this." Harry turned the new fact over in his own way, which was quieter than hers and went by pictures rather than words. He thought of the cupboard under the stairs and the years of being one small unwanted person in a house that would have been glad of his absence, and how he had built himself brick by brick out of necessity into someone who needed no one because needing had only ever cost him. He thought of how long he had carried that and how heavy it had been and how he had mistaken the weight of it for strength, and he noticed, lying in the gold light under the woven dome, that it was gone. Not healed, not argued away, not forgiven, simply gone, dissolved in the rising tide with the last wall, because a boy who is half of one life can no longer be alone in the way that had defined the whole of his. Whatever came up the stair for them, he understood, and something was surely coming. It would not find the person it expected. It would find something the world had not contained in an age and did not know how to fight, because the world had forgotten in its long cold that such a thing had ever been possible at all. "You're doing the thing," Hermione said without opening her eyes, "where you go somewhere sad and come back lighter. I felt the whole of it, the cupboard, all of it." She found his hand and laced her fingers through it. "You never have to go there alone again. That's the part I want you to have out of last night, if you only keep one part, not the power, not the unbreakable, just that, never alone again, either of us, that's what we chose." He turned his head against the warm stone and looked at her close in the gold half-light, and for once neither of them reached for a single practical thing to say about the war or the stair or the morning that was surely coming. "I keep thinking about the ceiling," he said. "The two lines that don't touch for the first half of the wall, that was us for years in a tent on a staircase, sitting a foot apart and not saying it. And the carver knew we'd get here anyway, knew it 1,000 years ago and left the whole map in the stone, and I used to think a thing like that would make it feel decided, like we never had a choice. It doesn't. It feels like being expected, like walking into a house where someone left a light on for you before you were born." She didn't answer that, only pressed closer, and he felt her agree with it in the one shared body of them, which was answer enough and more. They lay a while longer in the gold, in no hurry, one life in two bodies at the center of the woven world, and for that little while there was no war and no cutter and no keeper on the stair, and no dawn waiting up the spiral of pale stone with everything that dawns must bring. There was only the hollow and the pool that held their shore, and the finished flame of them burning quiet and unbreakable under 1,000 years of braided ceiling. Then, far up the stair at the top of the world, Merwin began to scream a warning, and the gold light of the hollow flickered as something struck the ring of stones, and the dawn came for them after all. They came up the stair into a grey and bloody morning, and into the middle of the thing they had crossed the roof of Scotland to escape. Vane had found the glen. He had found it the only way it could be found by one who held no bond, which was to follow the ones who did. He had put a trace on them Dumbledore's wards had missed, a patient man's insurance, and the blaze of the finishing in the night had lit it like a beacon across 100 miles of dark, and he had not come alone. The ring of stones that had woken gold to the bond now flickered and guttered as curse after curse broke against the old magic of it, and the standing stones held, the hollow's defense held. No one without a bond could pass the ring inward toward the stair, but that was not what the attackers wanted. They did not need to reach the hollow. They only needed to reach the two who had just walked out of it into the open air of the glen, and there were a dozen of them ringed about the stones, hooded, wands up, and at their center, unhooded, courteous even now, stood Cassian Vane. Merwin stood between the two young people in the ring, and she was not the slow old woman of the chamber below. 100 years of guarding a stair had made her something else, and she held the boundary of the stones with a fury of ancient magic that drove the hooded figures back and back. But she was one keeper and old, and the walls she held were long, and Vane had not come to duel a keeper. He had come for the two, and he had brought, this time, the thing that had been missing on the stairs of Hogwarts, not an old man to throw across the gap, but numbers and time, and the cold certainty of a plan he had waited his whole life to run. For a moment it was very loud. Merwin fought the way the stones had woken, out of a depth of years, and the ancient magic she pulled up through the ring drove the nearest hooded figures off their feet and flung two of them clean over the standing stones to lie unmoving in the heather beyond. Harry and Hermione came up the last of the stair into the middle of it and did not think, only acted, the finished flame answering before either called it, a wall of gold thrown up around the three of them that turned aside the first ragged volley of curses in a shower of dying green sparks. For 3 breaths, 4 it held, the two of them and the old keeper at the center of a ring of fire, and the dozen hooded killers checked and snarling at the edge of it, unable to close. Harry felt the whole shape of the fight in the one shared body of them, felt Hermione turn to guard the stairmouth while he covered the fallen keeper, the two of them moving without a word passed between them, because there was no longer any between them to pass words across. And for those 3 or 4 breaths it seemed, impossibly, that they might hold the ring until Merwin's strength or their own could break the attackers entirely. But Vane did not spend those breaths fighting. He spent them watching, as he had watched all his life, reading the flame, reading the ground, reading the exact geometry of 2 bodies and 1 light, and waiting with the patience of 11 years in a sealed room for the half-second the geometry would give him. "You finished it," Vane called across the guttering ring, and there was something in his voice that was almost grief, almost congratulation. "I felt it happen in the night. Do you know, in all my years, I never once felt a finishing before. Elinor and I never, we ran out of time. And here, 100 miles off in the dark, I felt yours complete, and it was the most beautiful and the most unbearable thing that has ever happened to me." He raised his wand, and it was not aimed at Harry, and it was not aimed at Merwin. It was aimed at Hermione, "which is why I cannot let you keep it. Forgive me." I have to understand it, and I cannot understand a thing whole. That is the tragedy of my whole life, that the only way I have ever been able to learn a thing is to take it apart. I will be gentle. I was always going to be gentle. Everything happened at once, then, in the gray light, the way the worst things do. Merwin turned at Vane's aim, too late, a century of vigilance undone by a single half-second of a keeper's divided attention, and a curse from a hooded figure she had turned her back on took her in the side and folded her against the base of a standing stone, and the ancient magic of the ring flickered and thinned as its keeper fell. Harry threw himself in front of Hermione, and the finished flame blazed up out of the two of them without either calling it, gold and enormous, and for one instant it drove the whole ring of attackers staggering back. But the bond finished was one life in two bodies, and one of those bodies stood a half-step nearer to Cash and Vane than the other, and Vane had spent 11 years in a sealed room learning exactly, precisely, where the reach of such a flame fell shortest. He did not fight the light. He stepped around it. A second wand from a hooded figure at his side took Harry across the temple, not to kill, only to drop, and Harry went down onto the frost-silver grass with the gold light guttering and the world tilting. And through the tilting world he saw a hand close on Hermione's arm, and he felt her seized in the same instant he saw it. Felt it in the one shared body of them, as though the hand had closed on his own arm, and he reached from the ground with everything the finished bond had made him. Reached to hold her, to keep her, to not let the half-step of distance between them become anything more. Harry, it was all she got out. Vane's voice said a word, and the air folded, and the hand and the arm and the whole warm woven nearness of her were torn out of the glen and away, apparated past the failing ring into the grey north, gone, and the tearing of it went through the single life of them like a body ripped down its center. And Harry screamed on the cold grass of the ring of stones as the finished bond stretched suddenly across 100 miles it had never been meant to span, thin to thread again to wire. To an agony of gold drawn out past all sense over the dawn hills, holding, still holding, because it could not do otherwise, because there was only one life now and half of it had just been carried off into the north. The hooded figures broke and apparated after their master. The ring of stones fell dark. And Harry Potter lay alone in the frost at the center of the hollow's broken crown, one half of a single life, the other half torn 100 miles away and receding, and the only thing in all the gray world that had not gone silent was the thread, screaming its low, unhearable note across the whole of the north, stretched to breaking and refusing still to break. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, Severance. The stretched thread did not let Harry lie in the frost for long, because lying in the frost was a thing a person did, and he was not anymore only a person. He was half of a life whose other half was being carried north into the gray, and half a life cannot faint. He got up. It cost him more than any spell ever had, getting up off the cold grass of the broken ring with the world still tilting from the blow to his temple, and the bond drawn out over the hills to an agony of gold. But he got up because the thread ran out of his chest toward the north and did not slacken, and as long as it did not slacken she was alive, and as long as she was alive there was a direction, and a direction was all he had ever needed. Merwin was alive. Found her against the base of the standing stone where the curse had folded her, and she was gray and shallow-breathed and a great deal too still, but her ice-pale eyes opened when he knelt over her, and her hand found his wrist with the last of a keeper's grip. "Do not go after her on your knees," she whispered. "You are no use to her broken. Listen to me. The thread is finished now. It cannot be cut. He will learn that, and it will cost him everything he is, but it will cost you time while he learns it. You have time, not much. Use it to gather your strength and your friends, and then use the thread, child. The thread will take you to her over any distance. It is one life, and it knows its own other half the way your hand knows the dark of your own pocket." Her grip tightened. "And when you reach her, do not become the weapon. I told you and I meant it. He will give you every reason. Refuse them. Save her by being the thing that cannot be broken, not the thing that breaks. Now go. I have guarded this stair 100 years for a flame, and the flame came, and it was worth every winter. Go." He did not want to leave her. She read that off his face and gathered what she had left and pushed him, with a keeper's will more than a keeper's hand, up and away toward the lip of the glen. And it was there, staggering over the frozen ridge with the dawn breaking bloody over the eastern hills, that Harry found Dumbledore already climbing toward him. The old wizard had felt the finishing in the night, 100 miles off, the way Vane had felt it, the way anything that understood the old magic had felt it. And he had felt, an hour later, the breaking of the ring, and he had come the fastest way an old man can come, which for Albus Dumbledore was very fast indeed. He caught Harry as Harry's legs finally gave, and held him up, and Harry felt the enormity of the thing pouring off the headmaster, held rigidly in check, as Dumbledore looked past him down into the broken glen and understood in a glance all of it. "They have her," Harry said. It was not a question and did not need an answer, and Dumbledore gave none, only tightened his grip on Harry's shoulders and looked at him with eyes that had never, in all the years Harry had known him, looked the way they looked now, not for the war, but for the two children the war had spent 7 years trying to grind between its stones. "Then we go and take her back." Dumbledore said. But not this instant and not you alone, and I will fight you on both of those and win, because I have buried enough students to have earned the right. Merwin first, the Order second, your strength third, and then Harry, then we follow that thread of yours to the end of the earth and we bring her home. You have my word, and I have given very few in my life that I meant more. They took Merwin down her own stair on a conjured litter, into the gold light of the hollow where the wounded keeper insisted she would mend faster than any of them believed, tended by the old magic of the place, and Dumbledore left 2 of the fastest of the Order to guard her, and then he took Harry the long way home to Hogwarts, because a thread that runs to the north can be followed from anywhere, and Hogwarts held the one thing Harry needed most, which was people who would come. They came. That was the thing Harry would remember afterward, when so much of the rest of it had gone to a red blur, that when Dumbledore stood in the war room and said plainly that Hermione Granger had been taken by the cutter and that they meant to go and get her, no one asked why, and no one weighed the risk aloud, and no one so much as sat down. Ron was there before the sentence was finished, white and steady, his father's old traveling cloak already on. I covered for you 3 days, he said to Harry low, gripping his arm hard enough to bruise. I told McGonagall dragon pox. I told myself you'd both walk back through that door and I'd get to be smug about knowing the whole shape of it. Don't you make a liar of me now. Where's the thread pointing? That's where I'm going. And around him the others gathered, the members of an order that had lost too much to lose 2 children as well, drawing their wands and asking not whether but when, and Harry stood in the middle of it, still bleeding slowly from the temple, carrying Hermione's distant torment down the bond like a coal held bare in his palm, and understood that Ron had been right in the hospital wing weeks ago, that some kinds of loyalty do not wait for the facts, and that he had, without ever quite counting them, a great deal more than he had spent his whole cupboard childhood believing he was owed. North, Harry said to all of them, and lifted his head, and the thread ran out of his chest toward the gray headland and did not slacken. She's north, she's alive, and she's telling me to hurry. Hermione woke in a white room, and the first thing she did before she opened her eyes, before she took stock of the ropes or the cold or the stranger's magic humming in the walls, was reach down the thread for Harry and find him and hold on. He was there. Far and thin with distance, drawn out over 100 miles of gray country, but there, unmistakably alive and coming. She felt the coming in him as she had felt everything in him since the finishing from the inside, no longer a signal received but a fact of her own body. And behind him, past him, reachable even here, even now, was the shore. She had wondered, in the moment the hand closed on her arm in the glen, whether being taken would cut her off from the one country that was theirs. It had not. The finishing had seen to that. A place made of 2 who are one life cannot be locked away from either of them. And when she reached for it, bound in a stranger's chair, it opened to her as it always had, the pale sand and the shell sky and the one warm sea, and she went there for a moment, only a moment, and stood on the strand and let it hold her, and came back into the white room steadier than she had left it. Let Cassian Vane seal his house against every rescue he knew of. He did not know of this one. There was a door in her that opened onto a country he could not find, could not follow her through, could not so much as prove existed, and she would go through it as often as she needed to, all through whatever was coming, and he would never know she had left the room at all. He was hurt and he was upright and he was coming, and that single certainty was the floor she built the rest of herself back up from, there in the white room with her wrists bound and her wand gone and Cassian Vane sitting across from her in a straight-backed chair, waiting, courteous as ever, for her to open her eyes. You are wondering whether you can reach him, Vane said when she did. You can. I have not tried to stop you. It would be pointless and cruel, and I am neither, whatever you have decided about me. He had a table beside him, and on the table were instruments, and the instruments were the sort of person's eyes slid away from, silver and old and wrong, and he did not touch them yet. I have brought you to a place I prepared a long time ago for a day I was not sure would ever come. It is sealed against tracing, against apparition, against every means of rescue I am aware of, and I am aware of a great many. Your Mr. Potter is coming, I do not doubt it. A finished Bond will always come. He will not arrive in time, and even if he did, he could not pass the door. So we have, you and I, some hours together, and I mean to use them as gently as such hours can be used. You're going to try to cut it, Hermione said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect, and she understood why. The terrible arithmetic she had carried into the north, the sum of one held past all sense, had been answered in the hollow, and she had not fully realized it until now. There was no arithmetic anymore. There was no letting go available to be tempted by. The thing was finished, and a finished thing has no seam, and this careful, grieving man across the table had built his whole life around a door that no longer had a keyhole. You're going to try, and you're going to fail, and I think some part of you already knows you're going to fail because you keep talking instead of starting. Something moved in Vane's pale face. You are very like her, he said quietly. Elinor. She had exactly that, the way of naming the true thing in the room before anyone was ready for it named. It is why I could not. He stopped. He folded his hands. You are correct that I am afraid to begin, not of failing, of succeeding. Do you understand? For 30 years I have wanted one thing, to take a bond apart and see how it is made, so that I might make one, so that I might have back what I lost. And now there is one, finished, whole, sitting bound in my own chamber, and I find that to begin is to admit that even if I succeed I will only have proven that the thing cannot be built by the likes of me, only broken. That I have spent my life becoming an expert in the destruction of the one thing I ever wanted to create. He reached at last for the first of the silver instruments, but I have spent my life becoming that expert. And a man must use what he has made of himself, or admit the making was for nothing, and I cannot admit that, Miss Granger. I am too far in, so, forgive me, I truly, truly am sorry. Try to reach him while you can. It will comfort you, and it will not save you, and I would not deny a condemned woman her comfort. You've made one mistake, Hermione said, and she made herself say it lightly, because a steady voice was the one weapon they had not taken from her, and she meant to use every weapon she had. You keep calling me a condemned woman. You've read every chronicle there is, Mr. Vane. I'd stake my life you've read more than I have, and every one of them says the same thing you just admitted you're afraid of, that a finished bond has no seam. You know it in your books. You've known it for 30 years. And you're going to spend the next few hours proving it to yourself on my body anyway, because knowing a thing and bearing it are different rooms, and you've never once managed to walk from the one to the other. She held his pale eyes with hers. That's not a threat. I'm bound to a chair. I'm in no position for threats. It's a diagnosis. You're not a monster, Mr. Vane, and that's the tragedy of you. A monster would be simpler. You're a clever, ruined man who's about to torture a teenager to postpone a grief you should have finished grieving 20 years ago. And the worst part, the part I'd pity you for if you weren't about to hurt me, is that when it's over you'll have your proof, and you'll still be exactly as alone as you were this morning. She's not coming back, Mr. Vane, not through me, not through anyone. That's the one wall your whole life has been beating against, and it doesn't have a seam either. For a long moment Cassian Vane did not move, and something in his face came very close to breaking, and Hermione watched it and understood that she had reached, with words alone, deeper into him than any of his instruments would reach into her. But he was, as she had said, too far in. A man who has built 30 years on a foundation cannot pull the foundation out and remain standing. And after that long moment he closed his face again, gently, the way a man closes the eyes of the dead, and picked up the first silver instrument and said, so quietly she almost did not hear it, you are quite right, about all of it. It changes nothing. I am so very sorry that it changes nothing. And down the thread, across 100 miles of grey morning, Hermione reached for Harry with everything she had, and found him, and told him without words to hurry, and braced her whole self against what was coming, and did not scream. And he began. Harry felt it start. He was in the war room at Hogwarts. Dumbledore and McGonagall and a half-dozen Order members bent over a map with his thread laid across it like a bearing, when the first working of the sundering reached down 100 miles of distance and closed on the root of him, and he went down between one word and the next, folding over the table, because what was being done to Hermione was being done, by the plain fact of the finished bond, to him. It was the thing from the stairs of Hogwarts made patient and thorough. A hand on the root of the self, pressing, prying, searching for the seam where he ended, and she began so it could begin to work them apart. But there was no seam. That was the thing Vane did not yet understand, the thing that Harry, doubled over the war table with the whole Order's hands on him, understood in the first agonizing instant. On the stairs of Hogwarts the bond had been new and loosely woven, and Vane's working had found purchase, had begun to fray it, had nearly torn it. This was not that. This had been finished in the hollow, walls down, each into each, one life. And when Vane's blade went looking for the place to cut, found only more of the single thing, and more, no matter how deep it pressed, because there was no longer a boundary anywhere in the whole of them for a boundary to be exploited. It hurt. It hurt more than Harry had known a living thing could hurt and go on living. But it did not fray. It could not fray. There was nothing left in them that was two. And that, Harry understood, kneeling at the war table with the Order's hands holding him up, was the exact shape of the trap Cassian Vane had built his life inside without ever seeing its walls. The man could press forever and never find the seam, because the seam was gone, but the pressing itself was agony, and the agony was real, and it fell on Hermione first and hardest, in that white room 100 miles north, with Harry only able to reach across the distance and take what share of it the bond would let him carry. He took all he could. He pulled the pain toward his own end of the single life of them with everything he had greedily, because every ounce of it he carried was an ounce she did not, and the Order watched a 17-year-old boy grip the edge of a table and go gray and shaking and refuse through his teeth to let go of the one thing keeping the other half of his own life alive. It would have been easier to release it. The bond did not ask him to hold it open. He could have shut it, spared himself, waited numb and ignorant for news. He did not so much as consider it. Holding it open was the only shield she had, and he would have held it open through worse than this, and he was beginning to suspect, no such thing as worse than this. He started. Harry got out through his teeth, gripping the edge of the table. The cutting, I can feel it. He's trying. A wave of it took him and passed, and he came up out of it gasping. It's not working, it can't work. But he doesn't know that yet, and he isn't going to stop. He's going to keep going deeper, looking for the place to cut, and there isn't one, and it's going to hurt her the whole time. He looked up at Dumbledore and the map and the thread laid across it, hours of it, until he finally understands there's nothing there to cut. We have to go. Now, I don't care about the door, I don't care that I can't pass it. We go now, and I stand outside it and scream until it opens, but we go now. Dumbledore looked at him a long moment, and then he looked at the thread on the map, and then he did a thing he had not done in a great many years, which was to make a decision faster than caution allowed. The thread will take you to the door, he said. My magic will take you through it. There is no seal Cassian Vane has made that I cannot break, given the wall in front of me and a reason, and I have never in my life had a better reason. The order comes behind, Harry. He gripped both of Harry's shoulders. You will hold that bond open against everything he does to it, all the way there, and it will feel like dying, and you will not let go, because you're holding it as the only shield she has in that room. Can you do that, carry her pain the whole way and still walk? I've been carrying her pain since a village lane in October, Harry said, straightening against the agony of it, and I never once put it down. Yes, I can do that. Open the door. They came out of the dark onto a bleak headland where a single black house stood against a churning sea, and the house was Vane's, and it was exactly as sealed as he had promised, and it did not matter, because Dumbledore had not come to knock. The old wizard walked up the path to the sealed door of that house through a storm of the defensive magic Cassian Vane had spent 30 years laying, and he took it apart as he walked, ward after ward, curse after curse, without breaking stride, an old man in the wind with his beard streaming and his wand describing the small, precise motions that unmade the labor of decades, and Harry walked in his shadow and held the bond open and bled from the nose and would not fall. Behind them the order spread out across the headland to meet the second thing, the thing Harry had not expected but Dumbledore had, which was the ring of hooded figures already there, waiting, watching the house, Voldemort's, set to guard the arrangement, to be sure Vane finished the cutting before they took what was left. And so there were two battles on that headland, the Order against the Death Eaters in the screaming wind, wandlight tearing the grey morning, and Dumbledore against the door, silent and relentless, ward by ward. And inside, a third, Hermione, bound in a white room, and Cassian Vane pressing his life's whole art against a thing that would not yield, and both of them now beginning to understand that it never would. The Death Eaters had not expected the Order, and certainly had not expected Dumbledore, and for the first minutes of it the headland was pure chaos, cloaks and curses, and the sea roaring below the cliff. Ron fought at Harry's shoulder the whole way up the path, and he was not the same Ron who had come running down Hogsmeade High Street with his wand shaking. A term of watching his two best friends carry something enormous had put an iron in him, and he threw hexes with a cold, quick economy that would have made his brothers proud, dropping a hooded figure that lunged from behind a rock and shielding Harry's blind side without being asked. A curse took the ground out from under them, and they went down and got up. A jet of red light singed Harry's sleeve to the skin, and he did not feel it, because the only pain he had room for was 100 miles away and arriving down the bond in waves, and every wave of it made him faster, not slower, because every wave was Hermione still alive and still enduring, and still, he could feel it, refusing to scream. The Order pressed the Death Eaters back from the house toward the cliff edge, McGonagall a fury of tartan and precision, the others grim and sure, and inch by inch the black door of Cassian Vane's stronghold was cleared for the one wizard who could open it. Dumbledore did not so much as glance at the battle behind him. He walked the last of the path to the sealed door with the wind tearing at his robes and his whole ancient mind bent on the wards, and the wards were the labor of a genius, layered and interlaced and cruel, and he took them off one at a time with a patience that would have been terrifying to watch if there had been anyone with the leisure to watch it. Each ward he unmade flared and died with a sound like a struck bell, and with each bell the door grew a shade less impossible, and Harry stood at the old man's shoulder and held the bond open against everything Vane was doing to it and counted the bells and thought, over and over, in the place where Hermione could hear him. Coming, 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 hold on, we're coming. Harry reached the door as Dumbledore took the last ward off it, and he did not wait for it to be opened politely. He put his shoulder to it with the whole weight of the finished bond behind him, and it burst inward, and he was through into the white room, and there she was. She was bound to a chair, and she was gray with the hours of it, and there was blood at the corner of her mouth where she had bitten through her own lip rather than scream, and the silver instruments hung in the air around her, turning slowly, and Cassian Vane stood over her with his wand out and his face wet with tears he did not seem to know he was shedding, and he was still trying, still pressing his blade against the seamless thing, and it was killing her by inches and not cutting the bond at all. Because there was no bond-as-to left to cut, only Hermione, being tortured in the failing hope that pain might make a seam where love had left none. Stop, Harry said, and the finished flame came up out of him and filled the white room, and every silver instrument in the air fell dead to the floor at once. He crossed the chamber to her before the last of them had struck the floor, and the ropes fell away from her wrists at a look, and he got his arms around her as she came up out of the chair. And for one moment the two battles and the deathless thing and the ruined man all ceased to exist, because the finished bond had closed the 100 miles of distance at last, and there was no gap left anywhere in the whole of them for anything to hide in. He felt the 4 hours leave her and come into him, all of it, the whole gray weight of what she had borne, and he took it gladly, because taking it was the one thing he had crossed the north to do, and because a pain shared between two who are one life is a pain neither has to carry alone. She was shaking, he was shaking. Neither of them said a word out loud. There was nothing left that needed saying that the bond had not already carried. They only held on in the middle of the wrecked white room, and let the fact of the other's nearness do what 4 hours of torture had failed to do to the thing between them, which was to make it, if anything, more whole. Then Hermione lifted her head from his shoulder and looked past him at the man who had done it, and did not speak, only looked, and her steady, level, unflinching look said more than any curse she could have thrown. Vane turned, and for a moment the two of them faced each other across the wrecked chamber, the grief-made cutter and the finished flame, and Harry saw that the man was not going to raise his wand because the man had already lost and knew it. "It doesn't come apart," Vane said. He said it in the voice of a man naming the thing that ends him. "I have been trying for 4 hours. It doesn't fray, it doesn't cut, there's no seam." His voice cracked on the word. "Every pair I ever studied had a seam, a place where the two of them were still two, and I could get a blade into it, and I told myself the only reason I failed was that I never had a finished one, that a finished bond would show me at last how it was truly made. And here is a finished one, and it has shown me. It has shown me that a thing made freely, all the way, cannot be unmade by any art in the world, and that everything I became, every year in the sealed room, every ward on this house, the whole of the life I built after Elinor, was built to break the one thing that once whole does not break." He looked down at Hermione, gray and bleeding in the chair, and the tears ran freely now. "I have tortured a child for 4 hours to learn a thing the old woman in the hollow could have told me in a sentence. There is no recovering it, you cannot take it apart and keep it. It lives only in the two who grow it, and it dies with the taking. I knew that. Somewhere under 30 years I always knew that, I only could not bear it." "Then let her go," Harry said, already moving to Hermione, his hands on the ropes, the finished flame pouring warmth into her, taking the pain of the 4 hours off her and into himself where he could carry it, because he could carry anything now, that was the whole point of them. "Let her go and stand down, and I don't care what happens to you. I mean that, I'm not the one who came here to hurt anyone." "He means it, Mr. Vane," Hermione said, and she was on her feet now, one hand in Harry's, gray and unsteady and entirely unbroken. "I told you an hour ago you'd learn nothing from this, that a sentence couldn't have taught you, and now you have, and it's cost you the last thing you had, which was the story you told yourself about why your life was worth living. I'm not going to pretend I forgive you. I bit through my own lip so you wouldn't get to hear me scream, and I'll feel your 4 hours in my sleep for years, and forgiveness like that isn't mine to hand over lightly, and I won't insult us both by faking it." She held his ruined eyes. "But I'll tell you the true thing, since true things are the only currency I have left in this room. Elinor is gone. She's been gone 20 years, and no bond and no blade and no sealed chamber was ever going to bring her back, and the tragedy of you was never that you couldn't rebuild what you lost. It's that you spent 20 years refusing to let it be lost, and so you never once got to simply miss her, cleanly, the way the living are allowed to miss the dead. You could still, even now. It's the only thing left in the world that might actually help you, and it's free, and it's been available the whole time, and it's the one door you never tried." She drew a breath. "Now let us out of your house and go and grieve your wife 20 years too late, and stop trying to cut the grief out of other people because you couldn't survive your own." Vane looked at her a long moment, and then at Harry, and something eased in the ruined, pale face, some 30-year knot finally, exhaustedly coming loose. "You are," he said quietly, "exactly what I spent my life trying to counterfeit, and you cannot even be angry at me properly, can you, because there's no room in the finished thing for that much hate. She was right, your girl. She named it the first day in the classroom. Earned, it has to be earned." He lowered his wand. "I will open the seals, take her out of my house." "Take her," he did not finish, because the far wall of the white room blew inward, and the cold came in, and it was not the cold of the sea. Voldemort had grown tired of waiting for his tool to finish. He came through the broken wall with 3 of his own behind him, and the temperature of the room fell with him, and his red eyes went across the scene in an instant and understood it, all of it, as he understood everything, coldly and correctly and without mercy. "It cannot be cut," Voldemort said. He was not asking. He had heard, through the wall, enough of Vane's confession to draw the conclusion, and drawing conclusions was the one thing his long, unnatural life had never dulled. 30 years, Cassian, and you bring me a thing that cannot be cut. I had hoped to have them severed and ordinary and easily killed. I see now that you have wasted my patience as thoroughly as you have wasted your own life." He turned his wand, without haste, on Cassian Vane. "You have ceased to be a tool. And I do not keep what has ceased to be useful. Harry saw it coming a half-second before it came, and there was no time to decide whether Cash and Vane deserved saving, and it would not have mattered if there had been, because the finished flame did not calculate desert. It only knew that a killing was about to happen in front of it, and that it had in it the power to refuse. The gold light threw itself across the room and caught the green curse a hand's breadth from Vane's chest and unmade it, the way it had unmade the killers in the village lane, and Cash and Vane, who had tortured Hermione for 4 hours, stood alive and staring at the two children who had just, without a word of forgiveness, refused to let him die. Voldemort's red eyes turned from Vane to Harry and to Hermione behind him, gray and freed and already on her feet with Harry's hand in hers because she would not be sitting down for this, and something in the deathless face changed, some old certainty rearranging itself into a new and colder shape. "So," he said softly, "it is true then, the old line, woven into one flame. I felt it in you when you turned my curse. I have never in 50 years felt magic that did not somewhere fear me, and yours does not, and that is more interesting to me than anything that has happened in a great while." He tilted his head. "It cannot be cut. Very well, it need not be cut. Cashin was always the elaborate solution. I prefer the plain one, and the plain one has been available to me since the beginning, and I was merely too fond of elegance to reach for it." His wand did not waver. A bond of two, they say, is one life. Kill either and the other cannot survive the tearing. I do not need to sever you children. I need only kill one of you in front of the other, and the arithmetic finishes itself, and I lose nothing but a quarter hour and the pleasure of the elegant version. The pale mouth curved. I will start, I think, with the girl. He has already shown me he will spend his own life to save even his torturer. Let us see what the great, unbreakable flame does when I make him watch the plain and simple murder of the other half of it. Behind Harry, Hermione's hand tightened in his, and along the finished bond that was no longer a thread but the whole shared substance of the two of them, Harry felt her not flinch, felt her instead go very clear and very calm and very fast, the mind that had never once turned back from a true thing already 3 steps ahead, and he heard her voice in the place where words no longer entirely needed to be spoken between them. Not here, not his ground. We run, we get to open sky, we get Dumbledore between us and him, and then Harry, then we stop running, because there is exactly one thing in the world he doesn't understand, and it's us, and a man who doesn't understand the weapon is the man who loses to it. Come and try, Harry said aloud to the deathless thing across the room, and the finished flame flared gold around the two of them and Cash and Vane both and blew out the cold and bought them the half-second. They ran. Voldemort's curse came after them and struck the gold and slid off it, unable to find purchase, and that alone told Harry more than any book had, that the thing Merwin had promised was true, that a curse thrown at a finished bond met no seam any more than a blade did, and slid away baffled. But sliding off was not the same as ending him, and the deathless thing had numbers, and the house was falling behind them into the greater chaos of the two battles on the headland. They came out into the wind and the wand light and the roaring sea, Harry and Hermione hand in hand with Cash and Vane stumbling at their heels, and the order closed around them, McGonagall and Ron and the rest, and Dumbledore turned from the empty door to put himself between the children and the broken wall through which the deathless thing was already coming. For a moment the whole headland held its breath around the two who could not be cut. Then Voldemort came out into the grey daylight, and the Death Eaters rallied to him, and Dumbledore raised his wand, and it was clear to everyone on that cliff-top that the running was very nearly done and the reckoning very nearly come. Not here, Hermione said low and fast at Harry's ear, the mind that never turned from a true thing already 3 moves ahead. He has numbers here and the sea at our backs, and Dumbledore can't hold him and shield us both at once. This is his ground. We give it to him and we take our own. She gripped his hand. The Hollow. We go back to the Hollow, Harry, where the ring turns away everyone without a bond, where he cannot bring a single one of his and cannot pass the stones himself, and we make him come to us alone onto the one piece of ground in the world that was built to unmake exactly what he is. That's the plan, that's the whole plan. We stop running there and nowhere else. Dumbledore heard her because Dumbledore heard everything, and without turning from the deathless thing he said, "Go. All of you go, I will hold the ground and follow. The girl is right, she is nearly always right, I have noticed it too. Take the Keeper's Road and I will buy you the minutes." And he threw up a wall of white fire across the whole of the headland, blinding, roaring, a working that made even Voldemort check his stride, and under the cover of it the order caught the 2 children and the whole of Harry's found and gathered family, and made for the Keeper's Road north. Cash and Vane did not go with them. Harry saw it happen and had no breath left to prevent it. As the white fire roared and the others turned to run, the ruined man turned the other way, back toward the broken house and the deathless thing that had just tried to murder him for the crime of failing. He looked back once at Harry and Hermione, and there was no plea in it and no apology left to make, only a kind of terrible clarity, the look of a man who has finally understood the exact size of the mess he has made of his one life and has decided too late for it to be called courage, to spend what remained of it settling a portion of the account himself. "Go," he said, or shaped the word, the wind took the sound of it. I will slow him. It is the only useful thing I have left to do, and I find I want, at the very end, to do one useful thing." And he walked back into the storm toward Lord Voldemort, alone, unbonded, armed with nothing but 30 years of the deepest and most useless learning in Britain, and the last Harry saw of him before the white fire and the running took him was a straight grey figure going the wrong way up a dying headland, toward the cold on purpose. They took the road north, back toward the ring of stones and the pool that held the shore and the ground that had been waiting 1,000 years for exactly this, with the end of everything coming behind them on the wind, and the one place that could end it waiting quiet and gold at the top of the world. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, Two Souls, One Fire. They came up into the ring of stones as the last light of that terrible day was draining out of the western sky, and the 12 great stones woke gold to them as they had woken gold before, and for a moment, standing inside the crown of light with the whole cold north falling away below, Harry let himself believe they had reached safe ground. They had reached the only ground. Whether it was safe remained to be seen. The ring was as they had left it, and as it had stood for an age, 12 leaning stones on the crown of the world, the frost-silver grass, the pool of black water at the center that held their shore. But it felt different to stand in it now, and Harry took a moment in the last of the gold light to understand why, and the understanding steadied him. The first time they had come here, they had come as two people hoping to become one thing, and the ring had opened to the hope of it. Now they came back finished, and the ring did not merely open to them. It knew them, the way a house knows the footstep of the one who lives there, and the gold of the stones ran warmer and truer than it had before, and the pool brightened at the nearness of the two whose country it held. They were not visitors here any more. They had been down the stair and given each other the last held things under the woven dome, and the place had made them what it was for, and now it received them the way a forge receives back the blade it made, glad and dangerous, and entirely at home. If there was 1 square yard of earth in all the world where the two of them could stand and be the whole of what they were, it was this one, and the thing coming up the mountain in the dark had, in choosing to force them here, made the single worst tactical error of a long and careful and monstrous life. Dumbledore did not enter the ring. He stood at its edge at the boundary of the stones and turned to face the way they had come, and told the order to spread along the ridge below and hold the approaches, and then he looked back at the two children standing in the gold light at the center of the circle, and there was in his ancient face something Harry had never seen there before, which was the plain unhidden knowledge that he had brought them as far as he could carry them and could carry them no further. "He will come," Dumbledore said, "alone. He has no choice in it, and it will enrage him, which is the one small gift the place gives us. The ring turns away any soul that is not bonded. His people cannot pass it, and neither in the ordinary way could he. But he is not ordinary, and he has torn himself into pieces to cheat his own death, and I believe the ring will read the wreckage of him as a single ruined soul and let him through, alone, unhelped, onto the one ground in all the world built to unmake exactly the thing he has made of himself." He came as close to the stones as the stones would let a bondless man come. "I cannot follow him in, no one can. The ring will not open its center to me any more than it would open to him with his servants at his back. Past this line, children, it is the two of you and him, and nothing else, which is precisely the shape the old prophecy always meant, though I confess I hoped to my last hour that I had read it wrong." "Vane bought us this," Hermione said quietly. It was not a question. She had felt it distantly down the ridge behind them as they climbed, a straight gray figure standing in a storm, spending the last of a wasted life to slow a thing that could not be slowed for long, and then a silence where the figure had been. He went back to hold him. "That's why we had the minutes. That's why we're standing in the ring and not dead on a headland." "He did," said Dumbledore, and for the ruined scholar who had tortured her he found, even now, a moment of grace. Cassian Vane spent 30 years learning to break the one thing in the world that cannot be broken, and at the very end he spent himself freely to protect it. I do not know what that earns a man. I am not the one who keeps that account, but it earns him at least that we not spit on the memory. He slowed the deathless. He bought you the ground. Whatever else he was, in his last hour, on the right side of the line. He straightened and looked past them down the darkening ridge to where a cold was gathering that had nothing to do with the coming night. "And now here is the reckoning exactly on time. Hold the center, hold each other. And remember what the keeper told you, both of you, because I heard it too, and I believe it is the whole of your hope. The flame is not for burning. Do not become the weapon, be the thing he cannot strike." He stepped back from the stones. Below, along the ridge, the wand light of the order kindled against the dark. And up the long slope of the dying day, alone, unhurried, radiating a cold that made the frost crackle on the heather before him, came Lord Voldemort to the ring of stones at the top of the world, to end the thing the old lore said would end him. He crossed the boundary of the stones, and the ring let him pass, alone, and the gold light of the 12 great stones guttered and dimmed as he came into the circle, as though the place itself flinched from the wreckage of the soul that had entered it. He stopped a little way off from the two of them at the edge of the pool of black water that held their shore, and he looked at them a long moment, and Harry felt the whole cold weight of that attention and did not look away, and beside him he felt Hermione hold the center too, the two of them standing as one thing in the failing gold under the enormous northern dark. There should have been a plan. On the road north, Hermione had sketched a dozen of them, contingencies branching into contingencies, the whole tactical apparatus of a mind that had never in its life walked unarmed into a room. But standing in the ring now, with the cold thing coming across the frost toward the pool that held their shore, Harry felt her set all of it down, one careful scheme after another, because none of it was the point and both of them knew it. There was no clever move to be made here. There was no shield to raise that was not, in some form, a wand pointed back, and Merwin had told them what a wand pointed back would cost them. The only thing they had brought up the mountain that was worth anything was the thing they were, and either it would be enough or it would not, and there was, at the last, a strange steadiness in having nothing to do but stand in the center of the oldest circle in the world and be, completely and without reservation, the two of them. Harry felt that steadiness settle into Hermione and out of her back into him. One calm passed between two chests until it filled them both. Whatever else they were about to lose, they had already up here quit flinching from it, and they had done it together, and that turned out to be the whole of the ground they needed to stand on. "I have wondered on the way up," Voldemort said, and his voice was quiet and carried in the cold like a struck bell, "what you imagined would happen here. Whether you truly believe an old story and an old ring and a bit of hand-holding will do what the finest wands of the age could not. I have been killing since before your parents were born, children. I killed your parents. I have spent a lifetime making myself into the one thing on this earth that death itself has learned to leave alone. And I have come up a cold mountain unhelped on the strength of a legend to look at the two of you standing in a fairy ring, and I confess I am almost disappointed. I expected the thing the prophecy feared to be more frightening than a boy and a girl holding hands. That's the whole thing you never understood," Harry said, and his voice did not shake because there was nothing left in him for it to shake with. Everything a person might ordinarily have felt standing where he stood had been quietly taken up and shared out and carried between the two of them until it weighed almost nothing. You keep looking for the frightening thing. You've spent your whole life looking for the most frightening thing in the room because you thought the most frightening thing always wins, and it usually does with you because everyone you've ever met was more afraid of you than they were of anything else. He felt Hermione's hand find his, and the last cold thing went out of the ring like a candle pinched between two fingers. "But we're not afraid of you, that's it, that's the whole prophecy. You made yourself into the most frightening thing in the world, and you climbed all the way up here to point it at the two people left alive who aren't frightened of it, and you don't even know why that should worry you." The red eyes narrowed. "Then let me frighten you the old way," Voldemort said, and raised his wand, which has never in 50 years failed, and he did not aim it at Harry. He aimed it at Hermione because he had understood the arithmetic on the headland, and the arithmetic was the one thing he still trusted, that a bond of two is one life, and that to kill either is to kill both, and that he did not need to comprehend the flame if he could simply extinguish half of it before it could be lit. "Let us see what your unafraid little miracle does," he said, "when I take the other half of it out of the world in front of you," and the green light left his wand, straight and sure and faster than any shield, and crossed the ring toward Hermione's heart. Harry did not think. Thinking was too slow, and belonged, anyway, to a self he no longer entirely was. He moved, and the finished bond moved with him, and he did the only thing a single life in two bodies can do when death comes for one of them, which was to refuse the division the curse required. He did not throw a shield. Merwin had told them the flame was not for burning, and some part of him, in the half-second he had, understood that a shield was still a weapon, still a wall between us and them, still the language of two things opposed. Instead, he did the opposite. He reached all the way open into the one shared substance of them, and he did not pull Hermione behind him, and he did not pull the curse toward himself. He simply, with everything the hollow had made of the two of them, refused to let there be a half of it for the curse to take. He let the last line between them dissolve completely, the way it had dissolved under the rising tide on the shore, so that in the instant the killing curse arrived there was no Hermione alone for it to strike, and no Harry alone either, only the single finished flame of them, and the curse, which had been aimed at a boundary at a heart at one of two, found when it arrived that there were not two, that there had never, since the hollow, been two. That there was only one whole undivided thing standing in the ring where its target should have been. And a killing curse is a division. That was the secret at the root of it, the thing Voldemort had built his deathless life upon and never once turned to look at. That his magic, all of it, the curse and the immortality both, worked by cutting, by tearing the soul from the body, by tearing his own soul into pieces and hiding them, by making, everywhere it touched, two things where there had been one. It was the oldest magic of division in the world, and it struck in the ring of stones the oldest magic of union, the finished flame. The two made one that the first pair had raised against the first dark age before there were wands to fear, and the two magics met in the center of the circle. The tearing and the joining, and the tearing had nothing to bite. There was no seam, there was no half. The green light of the killing curse broke against the gold of the finished flame and did not pass through it and did not rebound off it. It was simply undone, unmade, taken apart into nothing the way the flame had unmade the killers in the village lane, because a curse whose whole nature is to divide cannot survive contact with a thing that has become, freely and completely, undividable. The ring blazed. The 12 stones that had guttered when the Deathless entered flared now all at once to gold brighter than the sun that had left the sky, and the pool at the center brightened, and the shore within it ran gold to its horizon, and the finished flame of the two of them stood up in the center of the ancient circle and filled it and overfilled it, and for one endless instant the top of the mountain was brighter than the day had been, a crown of gold laid on the roof of the world, visible. The shepherds would swear for generations afterward, from 30 miles off, and in the pool at the center the shore rose to meet them. Harry felt it happen as he felt everything now, from the inside. The tideless sea that had lain waiting in the country of the two of them since the first gray dream came up all at once in a great gold tide, and the two carved threads of the hollow's dome, a mile of stone below, blazed along their whole 1,000-year length, and the 12 stones of the ring and the pool and the shore and the mark on each of their chests and the finished flame in the center of them all. Every one of these was, Harry understood, not many lights but one light, the same light. Wearing a dozen shapes across a dozen ages, the light that ran between two hands when two people chose each other and kept choosing, lit at the beginning of the world by a woman and a man of the old people, and never in all the cold centuries since entirely gone out. It had been waiting in the walls of the hollow. It had been waiting in the ring of stones. It had been waiting most of all in the two of them since before they had a name for it, since a shared dream of a shore, and now it stood up to its full height in the oldest circle in the world and was simply itself, and there was not a dark thing under any sky that could look at it and remain whole. And Voldemort, at the center of it, understood at last, too late, exactly what the prophecy had meant. He did not go quietly because he had never in his life done anything quietly, and because a thing that has torn itself into pieces to escape its ending does not accept the ending merely because it has arrived. He threw everything he had left at them. Curse after curse, the darkest workings of the darkest life the age had produced, every one of them a magic of tearing and division, and every one of them broke against the finished flame and was unmade, because that was the one thing the flame did, the only thing. It did not strike and it did not kill. It simply refused division and unmade anything sent to divide it. The ring became, for those moments, the loudest and the strangest place in the world, a storm of black light breaking endlessly against a single standing column of gold, the darkest art of the age spending itself against the oldest tenderness there is, and losing and losing and losing again. And with each curse he threw, Harry felt something happen to the thing across the ring, felt it in the shared body of them, felt the deathless thing begin, curse by curse, to come apart. For every working of division he hurled at the union and lost, a little more of the division he had made of himself came undone. The soul he had torn into pieces and hidden across the world to cheat his death had been held together, all these years, by nothing but the ongoing exercise of that same tearing magic, the endless outward pressure of a will bent on division. And here in the ring that magic was meeting a thing it could not divide and was breaking against it, spending itself, and as it spent itself the pieces of the torn soul, with nothing left to hold them apart from the union they had always, secretly, been meant to be part of, began to fall back toward wholeness, which for a thing that had made itself out of the refusal of wholeness was the same as beginning to die. He knew it. Harry saw the knowing arrive in the red eyes, and something moved there that had not moved in 50 years, and it was not the wariness of a curse or a blade or an army. It was the far older recoil of a thing that has spent its whole existence running from a single truth and has just been caught by it. That it had made itself deliberately, painstakingly, into the one shape the universe does not permit to last, the shape of a soul at war with its own wholeness, and that the bill for that had been sitting unpaid on the table since the beginning, and had just, in a ring of stones at the top of the world, come due. But he was not finished, and he was cunning past the ending, and with the last coherent strength of a will that had cheated death for half a century, he changed his aim. He stopped throwing curses at the flame that unmade them. He gathered everything he had left into one final working and threw it not at the union, but at the body, at the plain mortal flesh, at Harry, because a flame lives in two bodies and a body can still be broken even when the flame between them cannot, and if he could not divide the soul then he would settle, in his last instant, for stopping a heart. The working took Harry full in the chest, a black weight of raw unmaking, and it did not care about seams or unions or ancient prophecies. It was simply force, enough force to stop any living body, and it stopped his. Harry felt himself fall out of the world. He did not fall far because there was somewhere to fall to and someone to catch him. He came down out of the black weight in the stopping of his heart, onto the pale sand of the shore under the shell-colored sky in the country made of the two of them, and Hermione was there. Of course she was there. She had always been there at the far end of the light since the first gray dream, and now there was no far end and no light between, only the shore and the one warm sea and her, catching him as he fell out of the waking world with his body broken in a ring of stones, a whole reality away. "No," she said, "on the shore, in the place where words were barely needed, and this one was needed absolutely. No, not here, not you. We finished it so this couldn't happen, so there'd be no half of us for him to take, and I am not going to stand in that ring and watch the one thing we built to be unbreakable break because your stupid brave body stopped. Take mine, do you hear me? There is one life in two bodies, and one of the bodies still works, so take it, take the whole of it, I am not asking." "You said it yourself," Harry told her on the shore, and even here, even now, falling out of the world, he could not quite stop arguing with her, because arguing with her was one of the truest things he knew how to do. "In the north, before we came down the stair. You said the loving thing, the strategic thing, is for the free one to let the bond go, to let it break clean rather than be dragged down. You said you couldn't do it, and you were ashamed of that, and I told you it wasn't a flaw. I still say it isn't, but this is the other side of that exact coin, Hermione, and I need you to hear me before you do what you're about to do. If you pour yourself into me and it isn't enough, you don't get to grieve me. There's no grieving in a finished bond. You just come with me, so don't do it as a sacrifice. Only do it if you actually think it'll work, because you are not allowed, do you understand me? You are not allowed to spend yourself on a maybe." "It isn't a maybe," Hermione said, and on the shore she took his face in both her hands, and the shell sky was over them, and the one warm sea was rising around their feet, and there was in her face none of the doubt he half expected and all of the certainty he should have. "I ran the sum. I always run the sum. One life, two bodies, one of them still standing at full strength in a ring full of the oldest union magic in the world, on the exact ground built to feed it. There is more than enough of us to go around, Harry. I am not giving you my life instead of mine. I am giving you our life, the whole of it, because it was always the whole of it, because that's what we chose in the hollow, and I am simply, for about 10 seconds, going to hold all of it in one hand while the other hand starts your heart. Now stop arguing with me and let me save your life. You can thank me on the gate at the Burrow in the spring." And on the shore, in the tideless country that was the inside of the bond, Hermione did the thing the chronicles had only ever recorded as a horror, the death of one dragging down the other, and turned it inside out and made it a gift. She did not let his stopping pull her down. She poured herself the other way up the union into the broken body, the shared life force of the finished bond running all in one direction for the first time since the hollow, her wholeness flooding into the place where his had failed, one life refusing to let one of its two bodies die, and the shore blazed and the sea rose, and in the ring of stones in the waking world a boy who had been dead for the length of 3 heartbeats drew a breath. Harry opened his eyes in the ring. His heart was beating. It was not entirely his own heartbeat, and it never would be again wholly. It was theirs, shared out between 2 chests, one life keeping 2 bodies going on the strength of the half that still stood. Hermione was on her knees beside him with her hand flat on his chest over the mark, gray and swaying with the cost of what she had just poured across the bond, and he reached up and covered her hand with his and steadied her, and gave back, now that he could, his own share of the strength, so that neither of them carried the whole, so that the one life balanced itself again across the 2 of them, and they got up together in the gold light, hand in hand, alive, both of them whole. And Voldemort, who had spent his last coherent working to stop a heart, and had watched the heart start again, understood that he had nothing left, and that the thing he had spent a lifetime making himself immune to had just quietly, in a ring of stones, happened to someone else in front of him. That a life had been freely given and freely received, and had defeated death not by cheating it, but by being larger than it. It was the one magic he had never studied, because it was the one magic that required the one thing he had thrown away first of all, at the very beginning, before the Horcruxes, before the murders, before the name, the willingness to belong to someone more than to himself. The finished flame turned toward him. It did not strike him. It had never struck anyone. It simply stood whole and undivided in gold, filling the ring, being the one thing his entire existence was a war against, and the torn and hidden pieces of his soul, with the tearing magic finally spent, fell home toward the wholeness they had been fleeing for 50 years, and Lord Voldemort came apart in the center of the ring of stones, not burned, not blasted, not cursed, but unmade, dissolved back into the single ordinary soul he had refused to remain, which was far too small and far too torn to survive being made whole again all at once. There was a sound like a long breath let go. The cold went out of the ring. And where the deathless thing had stood there was nothing at all, not even ash, only the frost-silver grass and the 12 great stones burning gold, and 2 17-year-olds standing hand in hand at the center of the oldest circle in the world, having done the thing the oldest lore had promised, in the oldest way there is, which is not by being stronger but by being at the last unwilling to be alone. For a moment the ring held nothing but the 2 of them and the burning stones and the enormous silence that comes after a great noise ends. Then the gold of the 12 stones dimmed, slowly, gently, banking down from the blaze of the finishing to the low warm glow they had worn when Harry and Hermione first walked between them, the light of a thing that has done what it woke to do and may now rest. Below on the ridge, the wand fire of the Order guttered and went out one point at a time as the leaderless Death Eaters, feeling their master's absence in the marks on their own arms, broke and scattered into the dark. And at the boundary of the stones, where he had stood the whole time because he could not follow them in, Albus Dumbledore lowered his wand and bowed his head, an old man at the edge of a circle he was not permitted to enter, and did not speak, because there was nothing an old man could add to what two children had just done at the top of the world, and he had lived long enough to know when to keep silent. Harry and Hermione stood a while longer at the center, not yet ready to cross back out of the ring into a world that would want explanations, holding on to each other in the dimming gold with the wind coming clean and cold off the roof of the north. Neither of them looked at the empty place where the deathless thing had stood. There was nothing there to look at and no triumph in it that either of them could find, only a great weariness and the ordinary miracle of the other one still breathing, and the thread that was no longer a thread running warm and unbroken between two chests. When at last they walked out of the circle, they walked out of it hand in hand, and the stones dimmed to dark behind them, their long watch kept, their flame come and gone, and left them the memory to hold against the next age. Spring came late to the north that year, and gently, and found the two of them at the Burrow, which was the place they had both, without ever quite agreeing on it, decided meant home. The war did not end in the Ring of Stones. Wars are larger than the men who start them, and there was a long, tired season of it still to grind through. The leaderless Death Eaters run to ground one by one, the missing counted and mourned, the slow, enormous work of a world putting itself back together. But the spine of it had broken on a mountain in the dark, and everyone knew it, though the story that reached the prophet was a garbled thing about the chosen one in a final duel, and neither Harry nor Hermione ever corrected it, because the true story was not for the prophet. The true story was theirs, and Ron's, and an old man's, and a keeper's who was mending slowly in a gold-lit hollow under a mountain, and it was not the kind of thing that goes in a newspaper. It was the kind of thing that goes in the walls of a place, cut into stone, for the next such flame to find in an age not yet born. They had gone back to the hollow once, in the thin days just after, to see the keeper. Merwin was mending slowly in the gold light of the place she had guarded 100 years, propped on the stone bench beneath the woven dome with her white hair loose and her ice-gray eyes sharper than any invalid's had a right to be, and she had looked the two of them over the way. A woman looks at a thing she has been proven right about, and she had almost not quite smiled. "You did not become the weapon," she said. "I felt it even here. He struck at you with every division he had, and you answered with none of your own, and he broke on your wholeness like a wave on a stone. That is the only way it was ever going to be done, and every legend that says otherwise was written by a fool who was not there." She had made them tell her the whole of it, the ring and the curse and the falling and the gift given up the bond, and she had listened to the part where Hermione poured her own life into a stopped heart, and at the end of it the ancient exacting face had done its slow enormous thing again. 100 years, she said. 100 years I sat under this dome and told myself the waiting was worth it on faith alone, because the alternative was to have wasted a life, and now I have seen it. I can put this body down whenever it likes, and the next keeper can take up the watch, and I will go having seen a bond come freely to the finishing and then turn the death of one into the saving of both, which no keeper in 1,000 years was ever lucky enough to witness. She had gripped their hands, one in each of hers. Come back sometimes, not because the hollow needs you, because an old woman who gave up the sun would like, now and again, to look at the reason. Ron had come with them and stood a little apart under the woven ceiling with his head tipped all the way back, reading the 2 threads of stone climbing to the crown, and when they had left he was quiet the whole way up the pale stair, and only at the top in the ring with the cold clean wind coming off the top of the world had he said what was in him. "I spent this whole year," he said, not looking at them, looking north, "thinking the two of you had got something I never would, soulmates, the whole magic of it. And down there, reading that ceiling, I worked out I had it backwards." He turned. "It's not a thing you get, it's a thing you do. The old carver put it in the wall plain as anything, 2 lines choosing to bend toward each other over 1,000 years, and there's nothing in that a person like me can't do. It just takes longer, and there's no gold light to show for it. I'm not jealous of you anymore, is what I'm saying. I'm just glad I was there. Now can we please go home? I've been standing on top of Scotland for an hour, and I've lost all feeling in my ears." They sat on the low white gate at the edge of the Weasleys' garden in the long light of an April evening, the two of them, shoulder to shoulder, not talking much, because they did not need to. Mrs. Weasley was calling that supper was nearly on and would not eat itself. Ron was somewhere behind them, losing an argument with Ginny about the merits of a Chudley cannon's defense so poor it had passed into legend. The garden smelled of turned earth and the first cut grass of the year, and the bees were out, drunk and blundering in the early flowers, and it was, Harry thought, a great deal like a garden in Kent he had once walked into without leaving a chair, a place where nothing bad had ever happened, the safest place a person knew. Dumbledore had come to see them twice since the mountain. He was old and the war had cost him too, and he did not pretend otherwise, but there had been a lightness in him the second time that Harry had never seen in 6 years of knowing him. "I have spent a very long life," the headmaster had said, sitting in Molly Weasley's kitchen with a cup of tea he actually drank, arranging for other people to be brave on my behalf, and telling myself it was necessary, and mostly it was, and I have hated nearly every hour of it. And then the two of you went up a mountain and did the one thing I could not arrange and could not teach and could not do in your place, which was to love each other enough that a thing older than all my cleverness woke up and finished what it came to finish. I have learned a great deal in my life. I think the two of you may have taught me the last important thing at the very end, which is that there was always a magic stronger than any I studied, and that its whole secret is that it cannot be studied, only chosen. Thank you for that. An old man does not often get a new idea. It has quite made my year." And he had finished his tea, and complimented Molly on the scones, and gone, and Harry had watched him walk down the lane in the spring light with something in his step that had not been there before, and understood that they had given the man who gave them everything one thing back that mattered. The Weasleys had simply absorbed them, the way the Weasleys absorbed everyone, without ceremony and without limit. A place laid at the table without asking, a bed made up, a knitted jumper appearing at Christmas with an H on it, and that year for the first time a second one beside it with a different letter, hung on the same peg, as though Molly had decided something and did not intend to discuss it. Nobody made a fuss of what Harry and Hermione were to each other. Nobody needed to. Ron told anyone who asked that they'd been like this for years, and the only new thing was that the rest of the world had finally been let in on it, and he was, as usual, more right than he knew. "You're doing the thing," Hermione said, without opening her eyes, her head on his shoulder, "where you go somewhere and come back lighter. I felt the whole of it. Kent, my grandmother's gate." She smiled, and he felt it against his shoulder before he saw it. "You keep the strangest things. Out of everything that's happened, that's what you carry around, a gate you've never seen in a garden that isn't yours." "It's ours now," Harry said. "That's how it works, isn't it? Nothing's just mine anymore. Nothing's just yours. There's a garden in Kent I've never been to and it's half mine, and there's a cupboard under a staircase in Surrey that's half yours. God help you, and a shore that belongs to both of us that no one can find, and now this gate." He turned his head and put his mouth against her hair. "I spent the first 11 years of my life certain I didn't belong anywhere, and it turns out the answer was never a place. It was a person. It was always going to be a person." "You thanked me," Hermione said after a moment, "on a gate at the Burrow in the spring. I told you to in the ring when your heart had stopped. I don't think you remember saying it back. You were rather busy being dead." She turned her hand over in his. "You said it just now without either of us noticing. That's the part that gets me in the end, not the flame or the ring or any of the enormous things. That we've got to the place where the enormous things are behind us and the largest thing left in either of our lives is who we get to sit next to on a gate while somebody's mother yells about supper. I read 100 chronicles looking for what the bond was for. It was for this. It was always only ever for this." She lifted her head then and looked at him in the long gold evening light, and over her heart under her shirt, he knew without seeing it that the mark had changed since the ring. That the two bright stars at its center had been joined, in the days after the mountain, by all 10 of the faint ones around them, the whole small constellation lit and burning now, a finished sky matching the one on his own chest exactly, star for star, as it had from the very first gray morning. The thread between them did not need to kindle. It was past kindling. It simply was and always would be one life looking out through two faces at a garden in the spring, unbreakable, unhurried home. "Supper," Hermione said, and did not move. "Supper," Harry agreed, and neither of them got down from the gate, not for a while yet, and the bees went on in the flowers, and the light lay gold across the whole ordinary miraculous evening, and somewhere very far to the north, under a mountain in a ring of stones, 12 great stones stood quiet in the dark and remembered, patiently, against the day another such flame should ever come, exactly how it was done. Chapter 7 End.